Would you lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you, welcome. First part is the citizen comments, and looking on our sign-up list, Mr. Maurer.
Your Honor, members of council and members of the management, I've come down here tonight to tell you, and by you I mean specifically council members and members of city management, that I was very touched by a couple of beautiful cards which you sent me on learning of my son Jeffrey's death. They touched me very deeply. I feel bound to tell you how deeply. They came one after another, and if you've been in this situation, you know what's involved. The tears spring, and they sprang for me in the evening when I got them, after I got the cards. And I am living at the moment in a room in my house in which the windows are from the floor to the ceiling, so that I'm not awakened by a clock, I'm awakened by daylight. And when I know when I went to bed that night, the tear ducts were working. And when I woke up, I found myself lying on my left side. And I was glancing down my nose here, and my nose was a shimmering white, which startled me. And then I put my finger up to my nose and found it was moist. And what was happening was that the daylight was reflecting off my nose, and that apparently was tearing all night. Well, I'm telling you that because those cards were very, very meaningful to me, and I thank you for them. And now my mission for the evening is over. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, my name is Ron Geese. I live at 5584 Brand Road, and I'll be brief. I'm here primarily for two reasons, or three reasons, but I'll speak later on the third one. I've sent to all of you and all staff these pictures at the corner of North Street and High Street. I've been here my entire life, and I don't know who asked to take the right no left turn sign down off the stop sign, but it got taken down. The three cars to the north, you can't see. There's no sight view at all during the daytime. It's better at night because cars have lights. You can't turn to the right, or you can't turn to the left. You turn to the right, they run in the back end of you because you got the curb. I asked what the process is. I've met with 4 staff members and 3 council members. I'm asking tonight that that you just simply tell staff to take the 3 parking spots down. In behalf of the library, I do not speak, but they have passed a resolution that the sign of beware and parking there is gone, and the citizens do have a right to park in the library after 6 o'clock on Friday and Saturday nights. There's about 142 spots. There will be no towing at the library, and there hasn't been for 2 years. So I did that on my own because it really bothered me that I had lots of guests, and they would come down, and I do work with a company here in town, and they just can't find a place to park, and they're set 140 empty spots generally. So that has been resolved. The library's been very cooperative. Last, I want to represent my mother for a little bit. This is a book, The History of Dublin. I have a copy for all of you. I'm not selling them. They're free. They represent 8 generations of my family, from the Charles Mitchell family. And I was asked to submit my mother's pictures, who was kind of private and chose not to put them in the Citizens Book or the Journey Book in Dublin. But in the book, there's an awful lot of pictures of our family, which is the Charles Mitchell family. The house they built in 1810 is at the intersection of Emerald Parkway and Dublin Road. There's a log cabin inside the building. It's beautiful inside. I am the 6th generation of the Charles Mitchell family to live in Dublin. I hope that you enjoy the book and pick up some history that my mother passed on to all of my my children, which I have 6, and I have 4 grandchildren living in Dublin. So there's 8 generations of the Charles Mitchell family in Dublin. So that's why I've served here for a lot of times, and I'm just trying to be an advocate, and I hope you enjoy the history there. And the gentleman on the left corner at the bottom is my father, and John Geese. Thank you.
Hey, Ronnie. On behalf of City Council, we want to thank you for taking the initiative on the library parking issue, stepping out and getting that done for us. And you did it on your own volition, and it's a wonderful solution to a thorny problem. So thank you.
So can we get council to suggest staff to remove the 3 parking spots? I've asked, what is the process to all of you, and I've given you 9 pictures.
Mr. Geese, I think Marcia has a comment here to offer, so let's hear what she has to say.
Yeah, part of the discussion early on and why those spaces were added related to providing an environment where people recognize that you're coming into the historic district, and the idea of the parking was not necessarily for the 3 parking spaces, but to start to create the environment and cause people to slow down when they're coming through town. We've gone back and checked to look at issues related to if there have been any incidents or accidents in the area. That has not been determined to be a problem. We've looked at that. The issue of the no left turn sign was taken down quite a number of years ago from my discussions with some staff members, and it was at the request of the Historic Business Association. But before we did that, our engineering staff did a gap analysis to make sure that there were sufficient gaps in the traffic in order to make that left-hand turn. So that's the information on the 2 issues relating to the parking spaces as well as the left turn.
You know, it's funny you would say it's been taken down years ago, because I thought that the sign, and there still is one, the other day I noticed the one coming from going west, there's still that one there. But I always thought there was this left turn just between 4:30 and 6:30 was when you could not make a left turn lane when you were coming from the library, say that road there.
Yeah, and we can provide you with a staff report for the next meeting and provide you the analysis that the engineering staff did with regard to determining the appropriate gaps to make the turn. So we can provide that follow-up information for your review.
We also provide that to Mr. Geese
Sure.
as well.
Marcia, is there another way to slow the traffic down there with, would the removal really impact of those 3 spaces, or even maybe take 1 or 2 out? Because it is a tough, I do it all the time, it's a very difficult left turn to go back north, pretty much no matter what time of day it is. The view shed is totally blocked. If it is truly just for slowing traffic down, we've got all kinds of examples on Terra Hill of how to do that.
And we don't want that.
Yeah, I was going to say
I'm not suggesting that.
Because previously we
My
did.
point is that there are other ways to do it.
Right, and we did in the past, prior to this, we had rumble strips there. That was not
That's not good.
well received, so those were eliminated. We can go back and take a look at options.
Can you do that and report back to us?
Sure.
And I might add, the same 2 cars parked there all day long. So if you had 2-hour parking, we at least wouldn't have an SUV parking there. So, and the same thing beside the stop sign. There's 7 or 8 cars parked there all day long. There's not a 3-hour limit on signage. I mean, these things are needed. You guys are in the minority here. The people in the library that come in there in the daytime have dangerous times to turn to the left. There's no headlights. You can't see those cars when they're parking there. So for those of you all in the room, when you turn left, and if you agree, please tell a council member or someone. We need to get them removed.
No, I hear you, Mr. Geese, and I agree with what you're saying, so maybe we can kind of
We'll
work through all
provide
this.
additional information.
Yeah. And Mr. Geese, thank you for the book. I'm hoping 200 years from now, there are a lot of people here in Dublin that are now the 6th and 7th generation that are from here. You know, so I look forward to looking at this. Folks, I'm remiss. By beginning of the meeting, I wanted to share with everybody that City Council has found its new city manager, Dana McDaniel. We're all very excited. Dana is a strong leader with great vision, and we're looking for the best going forward. So we're all excited. Stand up. No, you won't stand up? Okay. Yeah, okay, there it is. Okay. Yeah.
Better late than never.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, there's a few other people here who have signed up to talk. Kevin Walter?
I think that's for one.
Oh, I see. Never mind. I guess we'll do that later on. Okay. Okay, I'm moving on to the consent agenda. Is there any items that a council member wishes to remove? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve these items.
So moved.
Second.
Ann?
Ms. Saleh,
Yes.
Mr. Lechleiter,
Yes.
Mr. Reiner,
Yes.
Mayor Keenan, Ms. Janice Zerker, Mr. Peterson, Vice Mayor Gerber.
Yes. Okay, very fine. So approved. Moving on to second reading, ordinances. Ann?
Adopting the 2015 annual operating budget and declaring an emergency.
Angel?
Good evening, members of council. As you are aware, we held operating budget workshops on November 5th and November 12th, at which time all departments put forward their budget requests for 2015 to the Committee of the Whole. For 2015, we are expecting that our expenditures will be $158.3 million, excluding any of our TIF funds and including transfers and advances out. If that holds true, along with the revenue that we're projecting within the general fund for 2015, it would still maintain a general fund balance at almost 81% of our general fund expenditures, which is well in excess of our 50% level required. I believe we have answered all the questions that were addressed during those 2 budget committee meetings, and so at this time, I would be more than happy to answer any other questions that you might have.
Okay, very well, thank you. Any questions of council?
I didn't have any questions. I just had a comment to make. I mean, you know, at least for me anyway, I'm back to square one with respect to a portion of the budget. You know, I would prefer not to vote against the entire budget. You know, I can certainly detail where my objection is. It's to that portion of the budget that deals with community relations. You know, we've had this discussion before, and, you know, I want to reiterate what I've said before. In many respects, you know, first of all, you know, that I certainly respect staff's proposal. You know, in your diligence in preparing the budget, you know, I certainly respect that staff believes that they presented a conservative budget, and I, you know, by the same token, I believe I have a responsibility as a council member, you know, to critically analyze the budget. I will say I'm a little disappointed in some of the reaction, you know, that I thought was somewhat negative. You know, I'm not suggesting anything with respect to my colleagues, you know, but I believe that my responsibility is to be something more than a rubber stamp. So I looked at this. Staff provided us with additional information. It was not persuasive to me. You know, in the documents that we were provided with the initial presentation that we've been provided with tonight, the cover letter that's dated December 8th, it indicates the individual will be the social media content strategist, and then some of the additional information that was provided indicated that its primary responsibility was to support the police department. So with respect, well, let me go back and say that my analysis of all the proposals, which were significant relative to past years, and with the understanding and acknowledgement that in past years, we've had relatively flat budgets because of economic circumstances. But my analysis involved what I thought was essential. Not that people aren't working hard, not that the positions couldn't be used, and I expect there might be positions that other departments could certainly utilize as well. But in this particular instance, in appreciating that it's difficult to find an apples-to-apples comparison, but those that seemed to be the closest comparison, again, weren't persuasive in my view. I would also point out that if the purpose of this proposed position is to support the police department, I think we're aware of many models where police departments utilize a member of the police department to serve as their spokesperson. So I think there are some alternatives here. Again, it would be my preference not to vote against the entire budget. Somebody can tell me, how I can, if there's another way beyond my comments, to express my objection to this part of the budget. I'm open to suggestions, but, that's where my objection lies. Thanks.
I wasn't at the meeting, but I did view the entire meeting, read the minutes. And with respect to process, because that came up at one of our past discussions. In the past, at the committee of the whole, the Finance Committee of the whole, as we discussed these things, if there were issues, and we've made motions in the Committee of the whole to change, add to, subtract from the budget. And I guess I would opine that would be the time at that Finance Committee of the whole meeting to make those changes or debate it at that point in time. You have all the staff members that are relevant to that particular area. We have counsel here, really everybody we need to answer. And I think in the future, and this is about process, not necessarily for what happened in the past, but going forward, I think that's the model we've always operated under, and that's what we should do in the future with respect to those kinds of issues.
I appreciate that comment, Mike. Well, I would remind you and everyone else that was at our first of two budget hearings, and my recollection is that at the end of that particular budget hearing, Marcia, asked if she could come back with additional information, which I appreciate, to support the proposal. So, I mean, either we were going to allow staff the opportunity to provide us with additional information, to support the proposal, or we were going to take a vote, without the benefit of that information. And I think it was useful to have that information. So then the question is, again, I don't know what the process was or should have been. I don't disagree with you necessarily, but then we have the second hearing, and then we don't have the appropriate staff there, with respect to the portion of the budget that I was questioning. We've got the additional information, so.
We got that information that night as well, so.
The second time around.
The second time, yeah.
Right,
So,
right. After we'd heard that particular department's budget at the first hearing.
So there wasn't a time to discuss and debate.
Well, and the one thing, I guess, maybe going forward, because years ago, we used to, as we would go through the individual budgets, either say, yes, we're okay with the budget and the positions if they're requested, or not. And then we had, over the years, not done that because that was just assumed that if there were issues or problems, that they would be raised at the meetings and discussed at that time. So I would recommend that going forward, that maybe part of the final budget committee meeting is to specifically vote on each of the recommended positions that are included in the budget so that there's not this confusion going forward.
Yeah, or each department, or.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think this cycle was probably a little bit unusual in the respect that, you know, there were, relatively speaking, a significant number of positions, new positions proposed, you know, as compared to our last 4 budget cycles. Again, because of economic circumstances.
-3 or something total?
If you compare the 2015 full-time positions to the 2006, we still have 3 less full-time positions.
I appreciate that. I mean, you know, but we could compare, you know, this proposal to 1999's full-time positions. I mean,
Yeah,
11 new
and,
positions.
I know, I had some conversation with Marcia about this as well, and in terms of whether it belonged in the police department, that extra person, or belonged in the public information office. I think the thought was that they didn't want to separate those areas. It did not make sense to separate the dynamics of that department, and I'll let Marcia.
And that's correct. And we've talked about the one thing you don't want to start having in each department, their own public information person, their own HR person, their own finance person. You want those so that there are consistent messages and as far as information and getting out there, so it's the city statement, so that it's not individual departments. So many years ago, and this year, the police department requested a public information officer position, and my conversation with the chief was that the preference is it be in community relations so that we have the consistent city message as well as serving the needs and addressing the concerns of the police department.
Tim, are you proposing some change to the budget you wish to make by motion, or are you registering your objection to a certain part of the budget? I'm trying to be clear as to what you're...
again, if you know, I think this is, you know, we're going down a new path with respect to process, perhaps, a little bit, and I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, we are.
I'd point out again, you know, Marcia, I'm looking at the document that was in our packet for this evening, and it says, this individual will be the social media content strategist and coordinator.
Well, that's part of it, and if it
Right,
doesn't
and it says
say...
the PR will also provide support, right.
And there's internal communications. And to Rick's point, council can always make a motion to make changes to the budget. So if council wants to make a motion, they can make changes, vote on changes to the budget. And part of the conversation that came up at the last meeting was you know, the issue of whether we should or shouldn't have that meeting is so that we didn't prepare a document that gets changed.
Right.
But council has the right to do that.
Right.
You know, there's some economic aspects to this, too, and you know, adding to the police department another fully unionized personnel as compared to somebody who's going to be not really in a bunch of different kind of situations and covering the police department. I just don't think it makes good economic sense. So I agree with the idea of placing that person in Sandy's department.
Well, I don't disagree with you, John. I wasn't suggesting adding another person to the police department. In closing, I just want to say, you know, that I certainly respect everybody's opinion. I hope you respect mine. You know, maybe we'll just have to agree to disagree here. I don't mean to suggest that any staff member, either of this particular department or any other department, is not hardworking, and, you know, that it wasn't a sincere request.
Okay.
With that, I will make a motion that we amend the budget with respect to the proposed position in the Community Relations Department.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? So a yes vote will be in support of the motion, a no vote is against that motion. Right. And call the roll.
Ms. Genesee Zerker?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
No.
Mr. Lucklider?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? No. Vice Mayor Gerber?
No.
Ms. Salee?
Yes.
Mayor Keenan?
No.
Okay, motion fails.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Is there any other council questions or comments?
I'll move that we approve ordinance 12-14.
I'll second.
109.
I believe
I'm
we
sorry.
want to
No.
Need emergency.
We got to
I skipped the page, didn't I?
treat this as an emergency, so.
So you want you want a motion to declare an emergency on this?
Yes.
Okay, so moved.
Second.
And,
Vice Mayor Gerber.
Yes.
Ms. Salee.
Yes.
Mayor Keenan.
Yes.
Mr. Peterson. Mr. Lucklider.
Yes.
Mr. Reiner.
Yes.
Ms. Janice Zerker.
Yes.
okay, on the ordinance, please?
Mr. Reiner.
Yes.
Mr. Lucklider.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gerber.
Yes.
Ms. Salee.
Yes.
Mayor Keenan.
Yes.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
And Ms. Janice Zerker.
Yes.
Okay, very fine. Okay.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Angel. Okay. Ordinance 110-14.
Accepting the annexation of 2.7 acres more or less in Washington Township, Franklin County to the city of Dublin.
Mr. Gunderman.
Thank you. Good evening. This is the continuing saga of the annexation process. This fortunately is the last action needed to complete that process. This is for the Liggett property, which is adjacent to the Amblin area, set back basically one lot's depth off of Rings Road. The area shown in red here, it's just east of the railroad tracks, which are this line right here. This is the official map of the annexation. As you can see, it does extend clear over to the railroad tracks, and when originally drawn up, had a number of right-of-way areas in it, and those have now been vacated through the county process, so the area will come into the city without those as public right-of-ways. And you can see this on the aerial photo. You have houses along Rings Road down here, not included in the annexation, and basically vacant area on the annexation part. This area has had, this annexation has had final approval from Franklin County, and upon completion, we are in the waiting period. We've completed the waiting period. We're in the action period now. So once the 30 days had expired after action, this would become official. And if there are any other further questions, be happy to answer.
Okay. You answered mine. I was going to ask you how long that was, and that's 30 days?
Yes.
Council questions or comments? Very well. Ann?
Vice Mayor Gerber.
Yes.
Mr. Reiner.
Yes.
Ms. Salee.
Yes.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Lucklider.
Yes.
Mayor Keenan.
Yes.
And Ms. Janice Zerker.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Ordinance 111-14.
Amending Chapter 35 of the codified ordinances to revise the fee and service charge revenue cost comparison system and establishing a schedule of fees and service charges for City of Dublin services and declaring an emergency.
Very fine. Mr. Stifler?
Good evening. Ordinance 111-14 establishes the fee schedule for 2015 based on the results of the cost of city services study. As you know, in 2014, a measure of inflation was used to determine the fee changes with the expectation that in 2015 a full study would be conducted. The proposed fee modifications resulting from that study are in the memo and attachments with the ordinance. These modifications were reviewed at the November 12th Finance Committee meeting, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay. Thank you very much. Council questions or comments? Okay. I'll entertain a motion to treat this as an emergency.
So move.
Second.
And
Mr. Lucklider.
Yes.
Mayor Keenan. Mr. Reiner.
Yes.
Mr. Peterson. Ms. Janice Zerker.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gerber.
Yes.
Ms. Salee.
Yes.
on the ordinance?
Mr. Reiner.
Yes.
Ms. Salee.
Yes.
Ms. Janice Zerker.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gerber.
Yes?
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mayor Keenan. And Mr. Lucklider.
Yes.
Okay, very fine. Ordinance 112-14.
Authorizing the city manager to execute necessary conveyance documentation to acquire 2.04 acres, more or less fee simple interest from Jane M. Jacobs and Thomas C. Jacobs, and declaring an emergency.
Marcia?
Yes, this is the acquisition of a little over 2 acres of property off of Woodland Drive, which is adjacent to an existing parkland, the Hutchins tract that the city currently owns. This is the agreed upon or the appraised value of the property, and we're recommending emergency action this evening so that we can close on a portion of the property this year and a portion then early next year.
Okay, very fine. Council questions or comment? Okay, very fine. Motion to treat as an emergency?
So move.
Second.
Ms. Janice Zerker.
Yes.
Mr. Reiner.
Yes.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mayor Keenan. Vice Mayor Gerber.
Yes.
Ms. Salee.
Yes.
Mr. Lucklider.
Yes.
On the ordinance?
Ms. Salee.
Yes.
Mr. Lucklider.
Yes.
Ms. Janice Zerker.
Yes.
Mr. Reiner.
Yes.
Mr. Peterson. Mayor Keenan. Vice Mayor Gerber.
Yes. Okay. Ordinance 113-14.
Petitioning the County Commissioners of Franklin County, Ohio for annexation of approximately 2 acres of land located east of High Street, north of Dublin Granville Road, adjacent to the Scioto River.
Marshall?
Yeah, this is the piece of property that the city acquired earlier this year along Dublin Road and the Scioto River, just north of property that we had purchased last year. And so we're just asking that this property be annexed into the city so that it's under the control of the city and our enforcement issues.
Okay, very fine. Council, questions or comment? Ann?
Ms. Saleh?
Yes.
Mayor Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Nazir Zerker?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gerber?
Yes.
Mr. Lucklider?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Fine. Okay, ordinance 114-14.
Amending sections 153.057 through 153.066 of the City of Dublin Codified Ordinances, the zoning code to amend the Bridge Street District zoning regulations.
Yeah, and to start out, before we have the presentation on this legislation, I wanted to ask Terry to come forward and provide some additional background information related to the Bridge Street District, why we're doing Bridge Street. And we continue to hear comments or concerns expressed about some information that we believe we need to provide some additional clarification so that the correct information is out there. So I'll turn it over to Terry first to address some of the Bridge Street issues in general and some of the information that has been incorrect, that's been out there and that we've been hearing from residents in the last few days. And then Steve Langworthy will come forward to address the ordinance itself.
Okay, very well.
Terry.
Thank you very much. Briefly, I think if we look back to when Bridge Street has started here in 2010, we're about 5 years into it. I don't think there's been an area of the city that has been as planned, studied, analyzed, publicly engaged as the Bridge Street District has been. I think from the earliest stages of it, council wanted to bring in some of the leading experts in the field. We engaged in a full range of fiscal impact and infrastructure analysis and urban design and other kinds of tools, all of which were done as background to inform kind of decision making. And it was based in part upon some of the, I think, forward-thinking aspects of council wanting to understand, given some of the changes that we are confronting in everything from economic competitiveness to demographics and changing characteristics of household, is Dublin postured to be what it needs to be for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. I think, as David Dixon said, as successful as we have been over the last 40 years. I think the Bridge Street District piece of that, when you see the analysis we've undertaken, you're now starting to see a lot more regional efforts beginning to align with that. The recent efforts of Columbus 2050, I think, is a kind of a regional response to, again, where Dublin has taken the lead, as we've done on fiber and a whole series of other initiatives that seem to stimulate other activity across the region. And the new 2050 initiative, I think, reinforces a lot of the analysis that Dublin did early on. And I think it's very, very helpful because when you're starting to look at what's projected for the Central Ohio region on this, it can begin to really inform what are the market dynamics that are going to change Dublin. One of the most striking pieces of data from the 2050, and I've been fairly heavily engaged in that effort, to depict the different drivers for development. We know over the last 40 years, development in Central Ohio has been heavily driven by the growth of the population segment-headed households of prime home buying ages with children. Over the next 40 years, and pretty much all the decades over that period, over 80% of the growth in households is 1- and 2-person households without kids. It's a radically different driver pushing development forward. So the folks who have engaged, Calthorpe and others in this effort, have kind of looked to Dublin and the planning and the analysis we've done as somewhat of not just a regional model, but I think a national model going forward. Because Dublin's trying to take the steps to address how do we remain competitive and respond to markets moving forward. Some of the big drivers on this, from our perspective, were economic development, because we increasingly heard, if you remember, when we went out to our companies and HR directors and others, that the lack of housing for young talent, that's particularly in the mobile part of young talent, that 25 to 30-year-old, was an increasing negative in their ability to attract talent to work in Dublin. And with economic development being at such the core of many of our development activities, that gap is viewed as being negative. You've seen a lot of quotes recently about jobs increasingly going where this young talent wants to work. We also don't have those kind of urban, mixed-use, denser environments, which Bridge Street is meant to address. So in terms of where the market dynamics are going and in terms of the economic development objectives, there seem to be some clear things beginning to align. We also know in Dublin that many of us are living in 4-bedroom homes that are no longer having kids in there, are looking at options to stay in Dublin. And the housing options for that group is another, in fact, it's probably the biggest growing segment of this 1- and 2-person household without kids is the empty nester side on there. So from an economic development perspective, from where the demographics are heading us, but also to building upon the core of the city that served the small village for many years with a much more dynamic core. What emerged from that was the Bridge Street idea for 6% of the city to say we think a very dense, mixed-use, walkable grid of development that meets a variety of housing types, that has strategically located office and housing and other supportive uses, that captures the quality of the river as an amenity that serves not just that development, but the entire community in a way that it never has before. Provides housing opportunities for a much broader range of folks moving forward than we've done in the past, makes a lot of sense. And that planning process has been informed by market studies and other kinds of analysis moving forward. So today we feel very, very good about that. Some of the information that's beginning to come out that has been raised before, the notion of, gee, it's a project, Bridge Street, that just is going to have 7,000 apartments in it coming online. If you look at the amount of development because of the density in Bridge Street, it is a lot of housing, it is a lot of retail and office, and when you develop at the kind of densities to create the walkable activity and the vibrancy that we're looking for to support those kind of activities, of course, over time, there's going to be significant numbers of housing units. I think the key point here is that's at build-out. And just as Dublin took us 40 years to get the 15,000 single-family units largely that we have today on that, that's probably another 30 or 40 years of build-out to the extent that this new demographic is driving smaller household types going forward. So that's not stuff that's going to occur overnight. There's a lot of area of Bridge Street that reflects redevelopment sites that aren't going to happen until the economic life of those projects run out and there becomes the desire to redevelop for these other purposes. Other aspect that's been emerging a little bit is all the projects in the pipeline are apartments. That's simply not correct. I think with the projects we've seen thus far, we've been incredibly impressed with the range and the mixing of uses that's been proposed in these projects. I would say of the 3 major ones in the pipeline right now, they all align very well with the community plan that's been adopted to reflect the developments. And in those areas where retail and mixing of uses is appropriate, we have a very dynamic mix. The Crawford Hoying project that you've got some information on includes over 600,000 square feet of non-residential uses, including hotel concepts and restaurants and conference facilities and other kind of things included. Other projects being contemplated on the west side of the river include condominiums, retail, office, and we have multiple developers proposing those. The Casto project, which is an area recommended for residential. First phase is purely residential. Future phases might have some integrated uses. But built importantly across the grid in an urban format that connects and creates a kind of walkability that we think is important. So we're extremely pleased with the level of developer interest, the type of projects, the alignment with the plans, the visions, the goals that have occurred. We've had to go through and work on creating the economic development models, and part of what we've had to address with council is we got to understand the developments to put together the development agreements. And as council's aware, as they've gotten more educated on some of these new development tools, financing tools that are emerging, we can't look at them separately. We have to understand that there's a basic development framework for a project moving forward, and there's a financial economic agreement that supports that. And we can't look at them in isolation. For these larger projects, where we have to have development agreements and a plan go together, the economics are simply too closely intertwined. So we explored, as you recall, on the Casto project, the letter of intent process as one way of kind of trying to arrive at that approach, and there'll be some other regulations you're considering tonight to help align that better so that we can make sure from the earliest stages of the project we're keeping the key aspects of development agreements and preliminary project concept ideas as aligned as we can. So overall, I think in terms of the ideas that are moving forward, the public infrastructure investments that won't just serve these projects, but will serve all of the citizens of Dublin in terms of the amenities that they're going to offer to the core. The mixing of uses, the character of the use that's being proposed, extremely pleased. I think in 2015, given the public investment in projects that's ready to move forward, the private developers that are ready to move forward, I think the 5 years that the city's invested in a lot of planning and analysis and public engagement with the community and developers, you're going to see some real significant transformational initiatives move forward.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Were there any questions of Terry?
A couple of quick questions, Terry.
Sure.
Is The area, and I'm talking about the area to the east of the river, south of 270, Sawmill Road 161, that chunk. I think that's what creates most of the controversy, at least for the purposes of this conversation. Is the location of that area what allows for a Bridge Street type project to be proposed? And what I mean by that is there's some question that we're abandoning the image of what Dublin is and what got Dublin to be what it is, and that we're going to sort of transform who we are by developing that area. Yep. Would you propose a Bridge Street type development, say, west of Muirfield, out in, do you understand my question?
Yep.
Does that location provide a unique opportunity to develop?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, if you look at the growth and development that's taken place in Dublin in the last 40 years, and you saw how struggling the center was, the Bridgepoint Center, the golf course that never redeveloped, another Dublin Village Center that really struggled. There's a lot of underutilized land in that area because the normal kind of suburban drivers there didn't have the opportunities and the market demand to occur there. I think given the demographics that are emerging and the benefits of kind of creating the development types we're talking about, when the city 5 years ago began to analyze this geography, it had tremendous assets going forward. The river going down the heart of it as an amenity that was underutilized, the visibility from the kind of road system that's there, the ability to build upon the historic core, which was the village when we were a few hundred people many, many years ago, kind of serving the area to build upon that core and create kind of a 21st century version of those elements. This is 6% of the city's land that we're talking about in the Bridge Street district here. It's a relatively small percentage, and even if those kind of numbers of residential units do take place, Dublin and all of central Ohio, as a 2050 study has shown us, will still predominantly be the single-family residential-led form of residential development that exists in the region. It's just the drivers that are going to be occurring in the next 3 or 4 decades are radically different, and that's what's going to drive the demand for new housing. And I think if we want to take advantage of the economic development objectives, as well as meet the needs of what's going to be an aging population in terms of folks who retire, empty nesters who want to stay here, and provide alternatives for future buyers of homes in the region, I think it does a lot for us. But the geography of that area is strictly related to the Bridge Street district. Those assets, those opportunities don't exist elsewhere in Dublin and wouldn't make sense other locations.
And would it, I guess the inverse of that also be true, that you couldn't necessarily build real successful single-family homes over in that area?
Yeah, clearly the market, given the 15,000 we built, hasn't taken us that way on there. I think some denser single-family homes, some maybe attached, and you've seen some things with the Muse that are much more urban in character. I think those kind of things can certainly be looked at. But in terms of traditional, lower density stuff, I think that would be a gross underutilization of that land. And you've indicated that most of the focus has been on the east, and I think that's because that's where most of the development activity has initially emerged. There will be some projects on the west, and we'll have to, make sure we engage folks properly on that as well.
And are you comfortable with all the studies and the input and all that collection of data? Everything's still on course, it's still on track, given what's come in and been more visible, you're still comfortable that we're
very much so. I think the amount of you've engaged some of the best transportation consultants in the country. You've analyzed, and I think the idea and the benefits that this grid provides to address so many of the traffic needs on this, and then to have the second study done, and I always get it wrong, JLB, I think is the name of the firm, that was presented to you that said where this grid meets your surrounding road systems, what improvements might have to take place and when. I think you've got the tools in place to handle transportation and traffic and all the other utilities in an extremely capable, well-planned way. You are as poised to handle this development, I think, properly and successfully as you could possibly be.
Okay, one more question.
Sure, absolutely.
Could you just touch on, Terry, and we talked about this, I think, when Teller Flats first came through, and it's mentioned sort of in the memo that accompanied this legislation, that project does not necessarily have much mix of use in it. Now, if I'm sitting here and I'm looking at that and I'm thinking mixed use, that doesn't look very mixed use.
Yep.
And I don't see something coming that's mixed use. How do we know that the mix will come? How do we know that diversity of uses?
That's an important point. The notion of mixed use doesn't mean every project or every location lends itself to commercial and other kind of uses being integrated with it. They simply don't. And the plan that you've adopted for the district doesn't recommend that. The plan you've recommended said for these kind of interstitial locations that are between the arterials and not around the edges on that, your plan recommends that this location be residential. The key is to have the grid and streets like John Shields Parkway, on which you're creating a great greenway, to connect the destinations to the west, some of which will be the historic district, some of which will be the new Crawford Hoeing development along the river, some will be the park amenities, and eventually the Dublin Village Center redevelopment. You want that to be a major node of activity as well, so that you've got good connectivity, walkability, and markets, so that when these restaurants and other uses, and we're hearing it from office users as well, who want to be in these kind of environments, particularly the kind of creative office space that doesn't have those urban settings locally, you've got to seed it with a strong residential market. This isn't land that's well-suited for other purposes. This is land that was planned and is totally appropriate for residential, and it will reinforce the more dynamic mixing of uses that occurs at those nodes where it's recommended in your plan.
One final question?
Sure, absolutely.
So if I live in Coventry Woods, and if I understand what you're telling me is that the future economic engine is going to need to be fueled by this type of development as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you talk to Dana McDaniel about the studies that they have done, interviewing firms, the folks that have come in and said, what do we do to keep our suburban office parks competitive over time? The stuff you are doing in Bridge Street is the very stuff that all of those things are aligning on. And I think 2020, being engaged in the larger 2050 analysis for the region, has strongly come to that same conclusion. It's one thing to say we need to grow and develop as a region, and here's how we're going to do it. But how that growth and development takes place is going to be just as important. I think the big advantage of Dublin, and I've given some presentations at Hilliard and New Albany and Westerville in the last 6, 7, 8 months, is how far out in front of it you are. They're responding to proposals and trying to get them to fit together. You've created a framework and a plan for how the pieces ought to fit together, and it's guiding private investment. And quite honestly, it's what's excited private investors to come in. It's based on the plans you've put together. So I think you're well suited to meet those needs.
So if I understand that, and I understand that concept of how we fuel the engine that is Dublin's economy, other than that issue, why would I care? If I live in Coventry Woods, why do I care if this development goes in or not?
Well, by way of example, I think several points. Most places that would have relatively close to them a really dynamic core with lots of restaurants, parks that line the river, other kinds of amenities that would be nearby there, would certainly add value to residential developments that are fairly nearby. When we had Chris Lineberger come in, if you remember what his studies showed, it's the single-family residential closest to this dense, walkable, mixed-use stuff that gets the highest value bump. You're getting the amenities of kind of an urban core nearby without the kind of aspects of kind of being in that location if that's not your choice. So I think it's a value add to residents in Dublin. I think if you have a strong dynamic core, right now Dublin, remember the estimates from the lady who came in and did our analysis, said 75% of our retail market leaves Dublin, goes elsewhere. Part of that's because those kind of options aren't here. Folks are going to Short Norths and Eastons and other kind of walkable environments where those things exist. So I think it's a value add from that perspective, and I think if we are successful, and I think apartments have to be an important part of this, getting the young professionals in early on, I think you're getting a feeder network for those homes, because those folks will be vested, bought into Dublin, want to be here, be employed here in Dublin, and they're going to be seeking buyers of the homes. And we know from the demographics, the bubble that fed kind of home sales and valuations for the last 40 years is over. I think that's a real good thing. So it's a value add proposition any way you slice it. The notion of a lifelong community, that you can get the young professional, you can raise a family here with the many, many residential neighborhoods we got, and you can retire in some really good empty nester kind of options here that also are seeking those walkable kind of environments, I think are all value adds to those single family residents in terms of the value of that asset.
I think it's important also, Greg, to your point, to talk about apartments. These are not family apartments that are going to cater to parents with children. I mean, I think that is instrumental in our agreement with the school district, that we understand and the school district understands that these are not apartments that are going to add children to the school district. These are, individuals that are going to live, perhaps a couple, but these are not apartments like we think of, in some other areas. And if you look at some of the product that we have in our community, I'm thinking of Caldwell Village, there's maybe 4 kids out of that complex, because those are catering to, younger professional people. And when you look across the street at a more traditional product, there are a lot of children that live there. So this isn't the sort of place where people are going to come and raise their families. These are the apartments for these young professionals, perhaps empty nesters, people that are looking for a much smaller apartment than a traditional, family apartment might be. And so we're catering to a completely different market. And I think that's something that's been out there, that this is going to somehow be a drain on our school district, and that's simply not true.
Yeah, I think I should have mentioned of the other things that you've done proactively, working with the school district to establish an agreement to kind of facilitate this development also uniquely positions you compared to other entities. And I think because we had a lot of those difficult discussions with the school, we shared the same demographics with them. The household growth with kids just simply isn't there on that going forward, and it's not being designed for that kind of product at all, given the
So we've focused on a lot of those other areas, but let us not lose sight of the incredible parkland opportunities that this presents with opening up the river. I mean, to me, that's really, really going to be special.
I think the river park, the pedestrian bridge, and some of the amenities that are emerging around that location will be the defining core of the city, I think, at the end. And I think that pedestrian bridge could well be the defining image for the city.
Terry, I see it as an economic thing. The next generation obviously wants to move to more dynamic and exciting places like Portland and Seattle and Austin, Texas. And, our job is to keep our youth here, because in reality, what drives this city, and we all complain about our income tax, but it costs $12,000 to educate a kid in this community. And really, the money isn't coming from our houses. It's coming from our corporations. And we got an obligation to provide employees for these companies that are driving this engine. We have a very high standard of life here and quality of life, parks and amenities and rec centers, and that's all been funded through some very clever use of land and development. And this is an important, integral part of that future for our community, because we have an obligation to keep our young people here. Ohio State University is training people. It's costing us a lot of money. And to see the youth move out of here because they don't have the lifestyle that they really want, and that's true. I mean, they do. They're leaving. And so we got an obligation to create that world here in Dublin. So I think it's very important on the economic side to see this happen.
Chris Lineberger gave a follow-up presentation in the region about a year or so ago, and he's been analyzing for the Brookings Institute where this kind of stuff is happening. And he said most of it is happening in suburbs, and most of it will continue to happen in suburbs. So there is still a very substantial segment of the population that is seeking, for a variety of reasons, the preference of the suburban location. It's just the lack of the product, and particularly in this region, of kind of a suburban form of an urban development here. I think on the economic side, if you think of when these TIFs and these incentives burn off, when we did the analysis on valuations per acre, the valuations per acre probably are conservatively 10 times per acre what they would be under conventional suburban development. So not only are we not adding, when they do burn off eventually, the tax valuation add to schools and others from this, because very little school children will be added, is going to be extraordinary.
And I think one thing to add too, Terry mentioned the amount of time that our discussions have been going on. This is something I think the city and city council has worked extremely hard at making sure the information is provided and out there to the residents to understand, from having speakers to come in to public forums. And one of the things that we did a couple years ago, we wanted to find out if the residents were aware of the Bridge Street development and what it included, and then get some of their thoughts on it. And we included questions in the survey a few years back, and we had very strong results that a high number of people were aware of Bridge Street and what was going on, and they were supportive. And some of the development that was discussed was along the development, the park along the river, and the pedestrian bridge. So I think from the surveys, we've gotten very good feedback from the community overall that they are in favor of this type of development.
It strikes me, Marcia, that going forward, because it's kind of like watching sausage being made. It's not always pretty, and I think we could maybe inform the residents more of these projects as they're taking place, because I think misinformation gets out there from time to time that just this is happening when actually there's 5 other pieces that are going on that just aren't quite ready to be put in through the process.
Well, we try very hard to get information out there, and all of the developments, we've had workshops to go over the potential developments. And like tonight, we have legislation that relates to one of the developments. We have out on our website an enormous amount of information, frequently asked questions. As we get information in or requests in, we try to get all of those answered and out there. And when we get emails from residents or individuals that have questions about it, we try to refer them always to those sites and provide them with information. So I agree, communication and education is the best thing we can do, and we continue to try to make sure we provide that to anyone and everyone who's interested.
Very fine.
Rick, if I could make a few comments. As Marcia stated, this has been a public process that's gone on for a number of years. So the concept's not new. It's not new to council, it's not new to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and those in the public that have followed this, it's not new to them, it's not new to the development community. So, there's nothing going on behind the scenes here. And, council is well informed with respect to this matter. Council is well educated, and I think I can fairly say that each and every member of council firmly supports where we're going with respect to the Bridge Street district. So to dispel any notion, to whatever community, I think we're fully behind this. And, I think that's an important message to send to everyone involved. With respect to the amendments to the code this evening, I think it's important to emphasize that everything that's, those changes that are being made to the code have been thoroughly reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and thoroughly reviewed over a number of weeks and a number of months. The one significant change that's being proposed by City Council is to allow City Council the discretion to take upon itself a review at the initial level. Rationale behind that is, and jump in if I'm misstating this, is because of the very significant investment involved. And these are policy decisions, and ultimately the body that's going to be held accountable is this body, not a citizen-appointed body. And I believe that council believes that that is a reason for us to take this step. But what we'll review will be reviewed in public. Nothing's getting reviewed in a back room. The role we're taking on, in some respects, is, the role of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And for what it's worth, the majority of council has experience as past members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So, not our first rodeo with respect to reviewing plans like these. And I would suggest that City Council, because of the dollars involved, will be scrutinizing these projects more intensely, than anybody else. And not to suggest that any other body, will not similarly scrutinize it. But it's also not to suggest that City Council is going to reserve unto itself that review on every occasion. It's at our discretion. So, I'm excited about this. I think all of council is excited about this. We have a tradition, our predecessors on this dais have had a tradition of being ahead of the curve. I'd like to see us remain there for all the reasons that Terry has stated, all the reasons that our consultants have stated over the course of many years now and many meetings. So, I'm looking forward to this moving forward. Thank you.
I would like to support what Tim said, too, because I'm not sure where this rumor started, but the Planning and Zoning Commission has been working on this code revisions for months. They've had special meetings, if I recall correctly, exclusively to this topic. And the major changes that are being recommended tonight came from them asking the City Council to make some changes to those codes. And the only change that City Council has made is the ones that you have made reference to, and that is to include us in the process. And our interest is really in those cases that have an economic development agreement because that is not the privy of the Planning and Zoning Commission. We've been very clear on that forever in years, that when they're making their decisions, they're not to take that into consideration. I'm concerned that people have indicated that we're rushing this through and that no one has had a look at this when the Planning and Zoning Commission has had it and has given it a word-for-word review and have made technical changes to it, English changes to it, and then made these 3 primary recommendations that we're going to be addressing this evening themselves, requesting that council make these substantive changes to this new code for this exclusive area of the city.
I think Steve Langworthy's ready to give you an overview then on the code amendments themselves, if you're ready.
I think we're ready for them.
Feels a little anticlimactic.
Yeah.
This is second reading for ordinance 11414 for the Bridge District. Again, if you have any questions regarding the amendments that were previously discussed at first reading, be happy to answer those as well. I'm going to concentrate more on the changes that council had requested. During the first reading discussion items from City Council were regarding some of the comments by the Planning and Zoning Commission, some of the recommendations that you see listed there. And some of those issues are going to be discussed with the Planning and Zoning Commission this coming Thursday at a work session that they're going to have that's dedicated to Bridge Street as well. So we'll have a chance to, Terry's going to come and explain some of the issues and some of the council's positions on these issues. Another issue was the master sign plan review procedures. I think Councilman Lechleiter brought up, and I'll mention that here in a second. And then the process changes has just been discussed. So the council's requested amendments for the process. These that I'm about to mention are only applicable to projects that also require a development agreement. So the first step in the process would be the basic plan review, which is our first major step in the development process. That's a basic plan for a development plan and a basic plan for a site plan. The amendment as written would move the approval from the Planning and Zoning Commission for basic plans to council, and it would actually require 2 votes or 2 actions by council. First action would be the action on the basic plan itself. The second action or second motion would be to determine who the required reviewing body would be for the formal development plan and site plan going forward. And the selection choices for that would be the council, the administrative review team, Planning and Zoning Commission, or for projects in the historic district would be the Architectural Review Board. So those actions, that step in the process requires those 2 separate actions to take place. As with the master sign plan, we made a similar change to master sign plans. So the planning or the City Council during its review of the basic plan would also determine the required reviewing body for the master sign plan. Again, with the same options of keeping it a council, architectural or administrative review team, Planning and Zoning Commission, and Architectural Review Board. Third change that was made, again related to this, is that council would determine the required reviewing body for conditional uses. That would take place again only with projects that require a development agreement. And the 3 bodies that could look at conditional uses would be council, Planning and Zoning Commission, and ARB, but ARB is actually a recommending body to Planning and Zoning Commission in that particular instance, but they would see it. For those are projects within the historic district, obviously. The second area of change the council requested was to provide a more direct appeal process. The appeal process right now is what we call administrative appeal, and administrative appeal goes from the deciding body or individual to the Board of Zoning Appeals, who looks at it as they would administrative appeal, and then there's a potential outlet to City Council for someone who is not in accord with what the Board of Zoning Appeals would have decided. This would provide for a direct appeal to council by the applicant for any adverse decision by the Administrative Review Team, Planning and Zoning Commission, ARB, BZA in case of there's a few times they do hear variances, and there are some director decisions like city engineer, myself, and city building official has some decision authorities in the code as well. So if somebody was unhappy with that, they could also appeal those administrative decisions as well. So those are the 4 areas of changes that are in your amendment. As I mentioned, the other issues for size limited housing, housing diversity, we're not recommending any further code amendments. But again, those will be discussed at Planning and Zoning Commission. Same is true for the tree-related issues and planting-related issues. We're dealing more with our city forester on those issues, but again, we'll discuss those as well. And then signs, we're not recommending any further improvements as well. However, we have discussed the idea of putting together a set of sign guidelines that would provide guidance to sign manufacturers or owners, bringing forward acceptable levels of sign we would look at. We talked, I think, last time about how far can we go or how far should we go, and the guidelines provide that opportunity for us to make that statement about how far are we willing to go, and perhaps some examples that are about how far we're not willing to go in there as well.
Steve, if I could.
So with that, we're recommending City Council approval ordinance 11414. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I had a real quick question about the sign provision. What do you think the timetable, I think council last time expressed an interest in a pattern book, some sort of guidelines for signage. When do you think that might be forthcoming?
Yeah, I think we put in your memo, we believe we could have that to you first quarter.
Perfect, thank you.
I should say first quarter 2015, just to be clear.
Steve, I have a question. Okay, as I understand this process, if we have an economic situation that we need to go through, the financing and so forth, then this body is going to look at the basic site review, opine on that, and then we're going to then refer it over to either ART, the Planning and Zoning Commission, or ARB, or somebody. What criteria will this body utilize in its decision-making to refer it to ART or the Planning and Zoning Commission?
First of all, I should clarify, too, you also have the option of keeping it yourself.
Or the option of keeping it ourselves.
Okay.
What criteria will we use to
I
make
think
that determination?
Council probably have to determine on a case-by-case basis as to how you want to decide to do that. My own view would be, and this is only my view, might be the level of infrastructure that would be necessary and level investment by the city might be necessary, and how that investment is tied to the development itself might have a big factor, a big point of agreement, or a way to make that decision.
Okay. Any other questions of Steve?
Yeah, just one comment, Steve, on the tree issue, which I saw that there was a lot of controversy over. I know with the emerald ash borer that there's this design idea, and I see it in the city of Columbus and all the other municipalities, of alternating trees and using a lot of different species. I'd just like you to keep in mind a real key factor in architecture and landscape architecture, and that's the unifying element of one kind of tree on a street. You know, Americans love to have a Cape Cod next to a colonial, next to whatever, Spanish house, and we sort of have this jumble, and they look at their architecture standing out in the street and looking at their house. So there's this sort of jumbly, incoherent bunch of colors and styles in this country. One way to unify that is to take one design element, i.e. a street tree, which what they're discussing, and you're going to discuss with them next Thursday again, and unify that. So I just want you to keep that in mind. Sure. I am not in agreement with planting 15, 16 different kinds of species of trees, some tall, some short, some fat, some, you know, I just think it confuses you and the viewer and the driver and the pedestrian as they're moving through that space. So if you just pass those sentiments on, I'd appreciate it.
That's a great point. I think the advantage we have in Bridge Street is as you go down the street, the street character itself changes. For example, we come out of a shopping corridor into a residential area, so there's some opportunities to make changes along there. They don't be changed every tree, but that you can actually identify new character areas using street trees to do that. Then, oh, I see a change. There's a change in the type of tree, which also corresponds with the change in character of the roadways you're going along. That gets us by both problems of not having an overabundance of one type of tree, but also performing the function as we go down the street of helping to identify different character areas.
No, I think it's a really good point, and the Dutch use that, even to signal freeway exits and stuff. They're very clever, and you don't see the Europeans jumping on this bandwagon either. Paris still has beautiful plane trees running up and down the street, and they coordinate in their architecture, their lanes, their allées like this. So I just don't want us going over the top, wrecking a really neat project that we spent 5 years now studying in depth.
I think we agree. We know what you're coming from.
Okay. Any more questions of Steve before we get into public testimony?
Just one quick question. Maybe, Marcia, you're the appropriate one to ask. We got a ginormous stack of paper with this legislation. This is not the legislation, is it? I mean, I think the legislation is about 10 pages long.
Yeah, a lot of
the rest of this?
A lot of the information is the background information from all of the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting minutes and their actions that they've taken. So this represents a good bit of time and effort throughout the process of the review of the code.
Okay.
So you're correct that the legislation is just the ordinance and the memos that have been provided by staff.
And we also provide you with both marked up copies and clean copies, so you have two full set copies, one clean, one marked up.
Okay.
I know I didn't write it all. Okay. Any more questions of Steve before we move?
We'd be happy to switch you over to.
Okay, very fine. Okay, well, we have 3 people who have signed up to speak to this ordinance this evening. I'd ask you one at a time to come forward and state your name and address for the record. Kevin Walter.
Hi there. Kevin Walter, 6289 Ross Bend. There's been some conversation tonight about time, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about time. You know, time is kind of an elusive thing. Sometimes there's too much of it, but frequently there's too little. You were all elected as stewards of the city of Dublin, stewards of our past and stewards of our future. So I brought with me tonight a book. It's a night for books. And I think Mr. Geese even mentioned this book. It's a terrific tribute to the city's past. It's Dublin's Journey. This book talks about the value of time in the development process of Dublin's future. By pointing to the decisions of prominent Dublin citizens like the Sells family, the Geese family, the Kaufmans, Chief Leatherlips, Eli Pinney, and more, it walks us from the start of the city through to modern day with events such as the development of Muirfield, the opening of I-270, and the planning and zoning process championed by many of you. It depicts the slow and arduous process that brought about modern day Dublin. It discusses a process of which we all reap the rewards each and every day. The book talks about time. It values time. It values patience. I remember joining the Planning and Zoning Commission at the time. The chair talked to me about the value of time. He spoke of the delicate balance between development goals and what is best for the city of Dublin. The process of development that we have utilized in Dublin over the years has created a truly idyllic community, one which we should all be proud of, but one that especially you should be proud of. Today's discussion subverts that process. I listened intently to the discussions of the City Council had over the years regarding the Bridge Street District. And Mr. Fogler is correct, it's been a 5-year process. The discussion has centered upon the need for speed to ensure that the development community is confident in Dublin's sincerity to move forward with projects in the district. The discussion has centered on ensuring that the development community has what it needs to successfully complete these projects. That discussion completely misses the mark. The Planning and Zoning Commission provides valuable time in the development process. It provides time for Dubliners to think about their future. It provides time for city staff to better work with developers. It provides time for developers to bring their best projects forward, not just the projects that they think they can get through the process. You've spoken of development agreements as the need to cut out the Planning and Zoning Commission. In fact, what you're doing is solidifying the economic interest of the developer, and that trumps the public's ability to participate in the process. I would ask that you carefully discuss the concept of time this evening. I would ask that you think about Dublin's journey and the value that time has brought to our community. I would ask that you provide the time needed to build the best Dublin possible. And with that, my time is up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walter. Next on the list is Allison Close-Myers. State your name and address for the record, please.
Allison Close-Myers. I live at 7630 Bel Air Avenue, and I have copies. May I give these to you?
Give it to the clerk.
Thanks.
I'm one of the ones who has been following this process for the 5 years. I am also the stalker that tends to watch on TV instead of coming into meetings, which I thoroughly enjoy, so thank you for putting it on TV often. I stand here today, though, as a concerned citizen, one who loves the place where I grew up and where I live today. I actually moved away 4 or 5 years to Chicago, high-density area. Absolutely loved my time there, but there's a pull that Dublin just brings you back home. And I chose this area to live with my husband and raise our family. I'm going to say I am not anti-development. If anything, I'm absolutely for it. I'm excited to have new life breathed into the Bridge Street corridor. It's been an area that just needs to be developed for pretty much the whole time I've been here. I've lived here. But I do want to see this done right. However, I've recently become concerned that developers are applying pressure on you to get this done and get this done their way as soon as they can. My main issue today is that you're trying to change the process, a process that requires developers to work with the city in such a way that Dublin's high standards are met. And large projects, such as this, add true long-term value to the community. This is a process that has resulted in Dublin being one of the finest communities in the country, where thousands of people are proud to call it home. We aren't blinded by bright signs in big box stores up and down our streets. We have green space for everyone to enjoy. While our processes may not always be considered developer-friendly, they have certainly proven outstanding results. One of my concerns is that we are making fundamental changes to a proven process that will affect every project in the future. I've included the table on the back directly from the memo dated December 4th, 2004 from Marcia Grigsby that specifically outlines my concerns. Taking the review and decision-making process out of the hands of the Planning and Zoning Committee and the Architectural Review Board erases a check and balance that has been in place for as long as Dublin has been a city. While this may help expedite projects, I would hate to find that a rush project resulted in a lesser product that we all have to live with for a long time. Thank you for giving me the time tonight to share my concerns.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Okay. Next on the list is Ron Geese.
My name is Ron Geese. I live at 5584 Brand Road. I don't have a summary, but I have some questions. First of all, what is the process tonight? Will there be a vote or not? Somebody, I don't know how you answer these or whatever, the posting of the 460 pages on Friday or something is something that that should have been part of the first reading. I got involved in this and I watched the 12th November meeting. How could 460 pages of correspondence be put on Friday night before the second reading? And current drawings are not posted correctly and up to date. The current P&Z process just works. For the last 38 years, why change the checks and balances that has created a state-of-the-art city? The creation of an ARB and ART review process moves development review out of the public view. Yes or no? You haven't explained what that means. I question whether further bodies will act out of political interest without this public checks and balance system in P&Z now. If council's not satisfied with appointed P&Z members or what they do, tell them why they're wrong or what they need to be or what they need to do different. Developers always complained about the zoning process in all cities. Current Dublin is not any different. I have a question about the abatement. It talks about schools. Don't know when to address it, but I want to know, are you abating them for the Franklin County Children's Services levy, the library levy, Metro Parks, and Columbus Zoo, are they paying property taxes on that? This is not your body, and you need to be representing these other 4 public entities that have levies up. And I addressed an article in the paper on September the 3rd, talking about all these communities and giving away money that's not really yours. Otherwise, the levy, the zoo levy, and the metro parks, and the Franklin County Children's Services, and the library are entitled to their small percentages that they get. Will anybody answer that tonight?
Marcia, can you try to?
Yeah, with any of our TIF districts that we've set up and any tax exempt districts that would be set up, the tax revenue or the payments in lieu of that tax revenue would either come to the city or be paid to the development for improvements that are needed to support the project, like the public or the structured parking. And anytime we've done the TIF, set up TIF districts, those dollars have been used to fund public infrastructure. So those dollars are deferred as far as getting to those entities. And in most cases, if those incentive districts weren't set up and the public improvements not completed, the development would not have moved forward. So it's a tool that the state of Ohio has given all of us in order to create a revenue stream or a revenue source that allows the development to help fund the improvements in the infrastructure that's needed to support their development.
But we have other entities like Children's Services and the levy, Metro Parks and the zoo, and are entitled to their small percentages. I don't believe it's the job of this council to be giving that right of their small numbers of property taxes to a developer for incentive purposes.
Could I take a shot at this?
Sure.
And Marcia and Angel, anybody else, please jump in if I'm misstating this, because I tried to recently further my education in this regard. Okay? Let anything east of the river that we're talking about here, which may be subject to a TIF, okay? My understanding is the taxes, the property taxes that are being collected today, Mr. Geese, will continue to be collected going forward, okay? So that's not being discontinued. The funds generated from the TIF are the result of the increase in the value of that property. So, imagine if we don't do anything, okay, with those properties in question that are today not increasing in value, or if they are, they're not increasing very much, all right? So, I suppose you could look at it as though nothing's being taken away or not being allocated to the entities that you described, if there's no increase in value. So they're getting, and they will continue to receive the allocation that they're receiving today going forward. Am I right about that?
You're correct.
Well, you're wrong in the fact that the Metro Parks and the Columbus Zoo and the Franklin County Services in this article here, including Mayor Coleman's house and downtown, have not paid.
Mr. Geese, Columbus does things a lot different than we do here in Dublin.
But is the zoo and the library tax and the Franklin County Services is going to be paid?
I don't think you heard what Mr. Leglider said.
Yeah, I think
today.
Well, the audience needs to hear it because all of us will pay our share. And I just think future people come and need to pay their share on these levies.
Well, and I think the other thing, Councilmember Lecklider is correct. They're going to continue to pay what they're paying today. It's just the incremental increase that is used to fund the improvements that are needed to support the project. So any new increment allows that development to occur. And one of the things that Mr. Fogler referenced was once these projects then burn off or the TIF or the district terminates, you have a significantly increased tax base for all of those entities that you referenced. And a very good example to discuss is the construction of Emerald Parkway Phase 1 and Phase 2. If we did not do a tax increment financing district to build that roadway, utilizing the buildings that were constructed by Cardinal Health and Verizon, that roadway, the city couldn't have afforded it at that time. And I think the other key point is that the individual developers, they're continuing to pay their fair share. It's just in a form other than what's called a property tax. It's a payment in lieu of tax, or it's a fee set by a new community authority. So,
But only on the increased value.
correct.
Yeah, so if I can, maybe I'll try here. So if we have a property worth $100,000 today, those taxes will continue to be, that landowner will continue to pay taxes on that $100,000 value to all those entities.
Correct.
However, with the development and everything that's going on, there's a presumption that the value of that land will be, let's say, $500,000. So that portion will be paid toward the things that you're talking about.
Correct.
And that's it, and if you didn't do that, the taxpayers would pay for those roads.
But you
I mean,
did do,
that's-
but you did deal with the school board, so they got their portion.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I only say that that's kind of, they say that the property tax growth in many school districts, commercial, industrial, are spread even among residents that are now paying taxes. Our values keep going up, we pay tax. But that's not a debate, that's for you to answer what it is. I am on 2 of those boards, and I have been told that they will not get their small 1 or 2% or 1.1%
They will in Dublin.
of existing property. But when that is a $300 million entity, like you say, they should be paying their share just like all of ours. But that's up to you. And in conclusion, I haven't heard an answer. Are you voting tonight? And what is the process? And then the last,
Well, before us tonight, Mr. Geese, we have an ordinance. This is the second reading, and it's the pleasure of council to vote on this, up or down, modify it, table it. So we'll find out how the discussion goes here in a little bit. But those are the
so
general parameters.
can it be passed as an emergency measure, is what you're saying?
It's not an emergency measure. We already had the first reading a few weeks ago. This is now the second reading. So it was duly notified. Here's the next step, which is the second reading. And this is the time when ordinances are voted on or up or down or tabled, what have you. I don't know what the pleasure of council is at this point until we have that discussion.
I understand that. The last request I would like, I hear about the beauty of the river, and I know it firsthand. For the last 10 years, you can't see the river from the east side. There's nothing but honeysuckle all the way along the river. And with our funds that we're generating, why doesn't the city not, in fact, cut those now? Or
There's a
sometime
memo in our packet tonight about how they're going to have it cut down.
Well, but in particular, where we got the biggest investment, and that's a 40-foot cliff there.
I know my neighbors who live on the river, they're down there right now, not now this time.
I'm talking about on the park land, on the east side of the river.
It will be done. It will be done.
They're on.
And last of all, I've served 30-some years in some way or another here. I thank you for serving. It's not easy to be a P&Z member, and it's not easy to be a council member. And I know firsthand. So
Amen.
I've just asking questions, and I'll leave that up to you.
It's also noteworthy the Wallace property is having all that invasive species removed as well, as I understand it.
A good portion of it, yes.
Good portion of it, yes.
Yeah.
There were a number of questions that Mr. Keys asked. I apologize, I'm not sure I remember all of them, but one that sticks in my mind, is this comment with respect to something, this document, the 460 pages. Could you address that, please?
Good.
As I said, we give you 2 copies of the same thing, one that's marked up and one that's clean, just so you can see what it looks like afterwards. You also, as Marcia mentioned, have a number of the Planning Commission minutes that go back quite a ways. All of these minutes you've seen before at one time or another. They're just added as part of our packaging that we do for council. We just add them back in since they're relevant to this particular aspect. So most of this material.
They were all publicized, though, 3 weeks ago at first reading. There's this somehow rumor that we've done this huge document dump on Saturday night or Friday night in order to somehow subvert this process, and that couldn't be further from the truth. All of this is a public document, has been public, has been on our website, has been in our clerk's office. It's completely, I don't know how it could be a more public process. The documents for this meeting were on Saturday night because that's when they got posted to the website, but the process has been completely public, and the documents in question have been on the website since first reading.
Yeah, all of the documents, with the exception of any of the changes that were related to the direction that was given by City Council at the last meeting, but all of the information was previously posted on the website, included in the packets. And part of the reason it was done, typically they're posted on Friday because of the size of this packet, and the week before being Thanksgiving, the packet didn't go out until Friday, so therefore then the website was updated on Saturday.
Okay, so tonight, this ordinance, just for the application of all, we are basically, not basically, we're reviewing the procedures and criteria on a limited basis with respect to when we are involving in an economic development agreement. We are also going to opine with respect to the changes as proposed by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And we have some proposed changes as it relates to the appeal processes.
Correct.
Is there anything else that's in this 10-page document tonight
That should be it, correct?
Yep.
I wanted to clarify one thing, and then I wanted to go back to make sure that it's clear to everybody about the all of the levies that we all pay for. First, I wanted to make clear that all of these documents that make up all these pages, they are minutes from the Planning and Zoning Commission or other entities that have been on the city's website after each respective meeting. So whatever the date of those are, they've been on for months. They just are all, like you said, you gave them to us all now in one packet, because we get them every 2 weeks as well. But if you would clarify again, if I understood what you said, was that in the example you gave, that everybody will pay the same tax that they're currently paying. And so if you pay $100,000, on $100,000, but if your value goes to $150,000 for that land, that $50,000 difference, that tax then is what the city will be using for the infrastructure development.
That's correct. That's correct. And any new development that occurs, the value of that land will still be taxed in the funds distributed to all the entities as they are today. It's just the incremental increase, the revenues that are generated from that will come to the city or go toward the development.
So those entities would have been planning according to the amount of money they have been traditionally getting for whatever the 10-year levy is or whatever time frame it is.
That's correct.
Hence the name, tax increment finance.
Yes.
You know, the township never received any money for all the tax increment financing districts that occurred over the many years to support the fire department. But what they did gain was, after that TIF went away, they gained the benefit of for instance, a Cardinal, a Verizon, all the metro properties, everything in and around Dublin. And that township fire department budget today is, I'm guessing, 23, 24, 25 million. They're very healthy because of what was done and the development that occurred. And that's the driver. Development is the driver of the economic engine that supports everything we do.
Well, and I think it's important to point out, too, when we start talking about taxes and the impact of this area, it's 6% of our city, land-wise. And so, it's not a huge difference now to those entities. But as that value is added and we get to the point where it's 10 times of the value that's what's there now, which there isn't, a tremendous amount, think about the impact that that'll have on the future of the city. So, talk about, paying their way. This land is going to, I don't know, the multiplier, but this land is going to pay way more than its fair share.
Before we get into council discussion, is there anybody else in the audience that wishes to speak this evening?
Quick question, maybe it helps to clarify, what is the burn-off?
Sir, you got to come up here and you got to give your name and address.
Roger Vogel, 177 Longview. Maybe it helped understand what is the burn-off time on this TIF? Do we have a time frame?
That we prescribed by law.
Yeah,
That's what I thought.
TIFs are allowed to run for 30 years or until the improvements that have been identified as being supported by the TIF are paid for and the city's reimbursed.
So it's not a forever thing. That was my
correct.
point.
That is correct.
This is going to go away, so.
And in fact, we've had some that have gone away.
We have a board that reviews this every year, by the way, all our TIFs.
Sure.
It'll be brief. I just want to make sure that I understand. This amendment to this code only affects this procedure with respect to Bridge Street and only with respect to a project that has an economic development agreement at the front end.
That's correct.
Is that right?
Well,
And,
excuse me, it's within our discretion. I mean, we may or may not
that's right. And we
reserve
can-
that to ourselves.
P and Z, there's been question and comment about how these projects aren't going to be reviewed at the same level of detail. And it's just going to be the developer to do whatever the developer's going to do. Is that necessarily true? I mean, that's not true, right?
All the same notice requirements apply as would apply to Planning and Zoning Commission. So even if you took the project through whatever stages, whatever public notice requirements apply to Planning and Zoning Commission would also apply here.
And the same thing might be done as it stands right now. The Planning and Zoning may review all these projects just as they always have.
Yes, you would make that selection when you approve the basic plan.
Thank you.
I want to ask something also. I think this is a stupid question, but when the ART meets, those meetings are noticed and the agendas are published, and they are in fact public meetings, aren't they?
Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I just want to make a couple comments with respect to, and I appreciate the citizen comments this evening. I mean, you know, they're the result of people obviously, you know, caring about our community. The comments with respect to time, you know, I'm struggling to understand how we're moving too quickly, you know, when we've studied this concept for 5 years. I mean, I served on the Planning and Zoning Commission for 5 years, and there was no project, whether it was Cardinal Health, whether it was Ballantrae, I can't think of anything that took 5 years to make its way through the process, so to speak. And then also the suggestion that if council reserves unto itself this review, you know, that will be, you know, something less than they might experience otherwise. You know, I would suggest you go back and look through the minutes over the past year or so regarding the Teller Flats project and ask them if they thought that their hearings before council were easy. You know, I think the answer to that is no. You know, as I said previously, you know, these projects are going to receive a level of scrutiny from this body, you know, certainly equal to the review that they would receive at the Planning and Zoning Commission or anywhere else.
Sure. Okay, okay, well, getting to the ordinance, is there any discussion?
There's been plenty.
Yeah, I wanted to real quick read something. I wrote a note to someone who emailed me today about the process, and I'd like to read it real quick because I think it might respond to some of the concerns. So I wanted to take a moment to assure you that council's intent is not to limit the public's involvement in the decisions surrounding future development in the Bridge Street District. To the contrary, we have had over 30 public meetings, workshops, charrettes, guest speaker events in the past 4.5 years to discuss this important vision. We will continue to invite public input, as has always been our tradition and, in fact, our law in Dublin, whether that be at a city council meeting, a planning commission meeting, an architectural review board meeting, a board of zoning appeals meeting, a community service advisory commission meeting, an ART meeting, or any other public meeting or venue we have expressly to ensure that our citizens are connected to and part of the decision-making process in Dublin. To say we are somehow interested in shortcutting or hiding or taking away the public process is a gross misstatement and has unfortunately been emailed around the city today. If something seems uncharacteristic, crazy, off-base, or contrary to what you have come to know about Dublin, then it probably is. The only change proposed to the review of the Bridge Street Code that was passed by Planning and Zoning Commission in November after months of their review is to bring the first step in the review process, the basic plan review, to City Council rather than the Planning and Zoning Commission, and this would only be for the larger projects that will involve some type of development agreement with the City of Dublin, which would have to be voted on by City Council as well.
Council would like the opportunity to get the first look at these proposals to see if they meet our expectations for quality, design, land use, density, layout, public space, streetscape, etc., before we enter into agreements with the developer to facilitate the building of the public infrastructure, such as roadways, stormwater facilities, public areas, etc. After council gets this look at the projects in the public meeting, with opportunity for public review and comment, we will send the project to the appropriate body for review, and the public process will continue. I've been a council representative to the Planning and Zoning Commission for the past 8 months, and we have had 6 to 8 public meetings concerning Bridge Street District projects or the Bridge Street District zoning code itself. And I've been on City Council since the inception of the idea for the Bridge Street District in 2009. I and the rest of City Council have been open, transparent, and very desirous of citizen voices and involvement for that entire time. And then I invited her to contact me and contact the rest of council to let us know your thoughts. Your involvement in the city has been helpful, and I know I speak for all of council when I say your voice and the voice of all residents is important. So I wanted to get that out. I think we all share in those sentiments.
I wanted to offer a few of my comments. I studied this for quite a while this weekend. I know everybody else did as well. And I think it was you, Tim, that mentioned that everybody on this council has worked very hard on the Bridge Street corridor and is very much committed to it, and I think that's a very, very true premise. But when I look through this document, I appreciate all the work that's been done with this. I'm very happy to see finally, because I've talked about this for a long time with this appeal process. I very much appreciate the Planning and Zoning Commission, all their wonderful hard work and the comments that they have made, and I think it helped make this a much better document. They have vetted this to the nth degree through public comment and their own comments, and I think that's to be applauded. The one troubling part that I have with this is, and I asked the question earlier, Steve, is with respect to where do we send this and under what criteria? And I would like to have seen this document address those issues, because my sense of it is, my observation so far, although I know we're very early in the process, that it's almost like there's different expectations of each body where things go. And that could very well drive different results. I'm not saying it's happening, but potentially it could. And from that standpoint, I would like to see more definition on the criteria by which we refer this to ART, to the Planning and Zoning Commission, what have you. So that's my only angst with this, and I'm not sure how to address that. I'd like to see, if it were up to me, I'd like to see more language, and I would like to understand what that is. I understand the financial side of this, and the world has changed since 2008, where developers need to know and get their financial ducks in a row a little sooner. I get that. By the same token, though, we've built a very fantastic city by having a very incredibly high bar through not only through our code, but also, and even in this code, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, there are still those subjective areas where we have to make sure it comports with the surrounding areas, and I infer from that our core value, and I want to make sure that we keep that. But I'm trying to figure out if we pick one of these bodies to go to, I'm not sure where the criteria is, or how do I ensure those sort of things that are still in that code. So that's a mouthful, but I'm trying to understand.
I would say two parts to that. One would be the review of the plan itself is guided by criteria that are listed in the plan and noted, and ones we evaluate the plan against when we make recommendations as staff and as ART. The second part of that is I think you're right. At some point when we need to have some better guidance, I think, from council as to which projects you think will go in what direction. And some of that may take place over time as we learn what your individual preferences are for projects as they go through. It's hard for us, I think, at staff level to come up with what criteria should you use to pass it on or keep it. I think the third thing I would say is the basic plan itself has a really good opportunity to set the stage for what happens after. So doing the best possible job, as we always want to do at the basic plan level, sets the stage for the architecture, layout, landscaping, whatever it may be, that allows regardless of who looks at it after that, sets a stage for what the expectations are. So I wouldn't discount the value of just going through that process of the basic plan and what happens after that and what kind of information you pass forward to whoever the reviewing body is after that is based on that approval of the basic plan.
But when you say set the stage, does that mean that it's set in concrete, that these other bodies are?
It is required that
what?
the site plan and the development plan have to follow the basics of what the basic plan has laid out, but there's always a lot of details that follow after that, obviously, that get into colors and some things that aren't necessarily covered at the basic plan level still have to be worked through.
Okay.
I've described the basic plan before as, if we put it in PUD terms, it's something we're used to, somewhere between the preliminary development plan and the concept plan, and it lies somewhere in between there.
Yep.
It's more detailed than the concept plan, but it's probably less detailed than the preliminary development plan.
Yeah, I understand that part. I'm just wondering, okay, if it goes to ART.
I know I can't go wrong putting in PUD terms.
No, I understand. Well, many of us were there when they were all just PUDs, so I get that. Any other thoughts, comments? I guess it's time for a vote. Ann?
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mayor Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Janice Zerker?
Yes.
Ms. Salee?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gerber?
No,
Mr. Lechleiter?
Yes.
for the reasons that I outlined earlier. Okay. Moving on to ordinance 117-14.
Authorizing provision of certain incentives to Exact Holding North America, Inc. to induce it to locate an office and associated operations and workforce within the city, and authorizing execution of an economic development agreement.
I'll have to put 2.0
Michael?
on it.
Good evening, members of council. A brief summary from first reading. Exact Software is a software development and IT consulting firm. They're based in the Netherlands, and they have several office locations overseas and in the U.S. This economic development agreement is in response to the company conducting a national real estate search for an expanded U.S. headquarters. Exact plans to locate 100 employees to Dublin in 2015 and create an additional 15 jobs over the next 3 years. This accounts for approximately $1.2 million in net income tax withholdings over the 7-year term of the lease. With that, I'll remain up here for questions, but I'd like to introduce Robin Foster. Robin is the general counsel for Exact Software, and Robin will give you some additional information and about the project and the company.
Certainly. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you for having me. So on behalf of Exact Software, it's a privilege to be in front of you. We, as a resident myself of the city of Dublin, I know this to be a wonderful community. I think we're looking towards a decision that allows us to invest further in this community with some very important jobs. I actually had a chance to review the economic development agreement as we prepared for this. And one thing I'd like to point out that was contained in the agreement that you may or may not have had a chance to observe is that we're not talking about mall-type jobs in this context. We're talking about jobs that Exact will be bringing to the city of Dublin that average, I think, $83,000 a year. Significant jobs. We're bringing on additional attorneys, additional sourcing and procurement people, and what we're ultimately doing is making a decision to invest in Ohio, in part because of the economic incentives that are made available to us here, but also in part because of the wonderful resources that communities like Dublin offer, that universities like Ohio State University offer in terms of IT development, that organizations like Tech Columbus as an incubator offer to our company in making a decision to locate here. I don't know how much you know about Exact Software, how much you were briefed. We're a Netherlands-based software company, which if you do the conversion from euros to US dollars, has an annual gross revenue in the neighborhood of $300 million a year. Somewhere between a quarter and a third of that is based on America's revenues. We have about 5 different business units that operate in the Americas. Those include company business units with locations in Silicon Valley, in Boston, in Minneapolis, and right here in Columbus, we have one of our business units that was founded in Marion, Ohio, just north of here. So we have roots in this community. We have made some very careful choices about where we might want to locate, and Dublin is a terrific option, and that's why we're here today.
I did look up your company, and needless to say, it's very dynamic, obviously growing, and we very much welcome you here to Dublin.
Thank you.
Thank you for your kind words. We really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Ann?
Ms. Saleh?
Yes.
Mr. Lechleiter?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gerber?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? Yes. Mayor Keenan? Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Nazizerka?
Yes.
Congratulations, Michael. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, we're now into the introduction, first reading, ordinance 115-14.
Authorizing execution of a development and tax increment financing agreement to facilitate the construction of a residential development and provide for the construction of public infrastructure improvements relating thereto.
Okay, is there an introduction? Okay. Terry?
Great. Thank you again. The agreement before you tonight is an agreement for the proposed Haller Flats project. It is consistent with the letter of intent, which was authorized by City Council in October. You'll have some companion legislation tonight establishing the TIF districts associated with this. Important to differentiate, I think it makes clear in this agreement, this does not substitute for or is subservient to in any way the development review process that the project still needs to go through. But it establishes the basic economic terms, similar to what we've been talking about in terms of process, that define how this project would move forward. Again, the general aspects of this project are fully consistent with the information provided in your October meetings and your October 27th ultimate action related to the LOI. Although there's references to future phases, nothing in this agreement limits or applies in any meaningful way to future phases of projects. It's just to give a sense of that moving forward concepts at this point. The private improvements as they're identified include 420 units of multifamily housing with a minimum taxable value of $20 million. It's important to note the minimum $20 million is established to relate to and support the minimum service payment guarantees that accompany this project. We all anticipate the actual valuations to be meaningfully higher than that going forward, and our experience would suggest that, as would the developers. And there are some criteria with regard to performance timeframes. Among the items that this project is leveraging for the city is the John Shields Parkway, as we indicated to you before, from Village Center Drive or Parkway all the way through to Riverside Drive relocated would be completed and leveraged by this project going forward, an estimated $10.1 million. In addition, the city would take on the obligation for a very small section of interior street, Graham Street on the internal, and all of the other streets, McCune, Watson, and Deerdorf that are outlined on your exhibits there. The developer pays the first $1.15 million towards that. City contributes the next $2.5, as we had outlined in the original LOI, and any cost in excess of the $3.65 million would be a developer expense on those projects. The developer is dedicating all the right-of-way for this project to the city at no cost. That includes the right-of-way for John Shields Parkway and those internal streets. One of the unique features of this was the parkland exchange. We went through that and be happy to if you want to see the exhibits on that again tonight. That led to the land exchange that's embodied in here. In effect, the developer is dedicating their 1.9 acre park, major park, in conformance with the requirements for the open space for their project. But there is a trade of real estate that both provides some of these legacy city parkland along Taller Ridge Drive, about 1.4 acres of that to the developer. In exchange, we get 1.3 acres of actually prime frontage to continue to implement our John Shields Parkway Greenway along the project on there. The other benefit of that is in keeping with the kind of MKSK proposal that you all saw a while back. It allows buildings to frame this very important signature street as our urban design objectives try to do on a moving forward basis. So the land swap provisions are established in here as well. Those are fully consistent with what was laid out the LOI, and we're more than happy to go into any more detail on those if you would like those this evening. With regard to future development, the exhibits do depict the additional 8-acre option that the developer has on what would be the Thomas property, the Phase 2 land, and it also shows the areas where the buyback provisions for the buyer's property that the city now owns could be acquired by the developer as part of future phase. The commitment within the agreement is that those will be pursued with mixed-use development as we approach the more intense activity centers to the west. The developer was fully cooperative, as we indicated before, in helping us realign John Shields Parkway as we identified some of the urban design principles we wanted to achieve, framing the development, putting in the green. They initially secured the site control of the buyer site for us under what we considered very good terms and have some rights to acquire within a period of time the stuff we don't need for right-of-way or green as part of a development, obviously subject to plan reviews and approvals going with that. The minimum service payment obligation will no longer apply to the developer at such time as the appraised value of the TIF equals 130% or more of that value used to calculate the minimum service payment for a period of 4 consecutive years. Been discussions in terms of how that works. I'll leave our finance folks and bond counsel and Marcia to address any more detailed questions you may have on that. The developer has the obligation to do all things that they typically need to do with regard to the tax increment financing and establishing the district and making the payments. With regard to school impacts, just to make you aware, this project is covered by the Bridge Street District Cooperative Agreement that was entered into between the schools and the City of Dublin, which provides for the first 15 years 100% of the applicable real estate taxes can be captured under this TIF. In the years 16 through 30, effectively 90% can be captured to go towards these improvements. With the minimum service payments on here, the Phase 1 with current millage should produce about over $700,000 annually in the first 15 years and about $655,000. Again, I think that's considering no appreciation in the real estate, which again is a very conservatizing element here for the second 15 years. As we discussed at the time of the letter of intent, we think some of the important public benefits of the project is that by leveraging the design, construction, and completion of what is a high-finished street, John Shields Parkway, one of the key east-west signature roadways in the Bridge Street District, it provides for the implementation of one of our most important early road system elements, but it also facilitates the timely removal of the Toller Road intersection with Riverside Drive's full turning movements in all directions. With the new Emerald Parkway and the relocation of Riverside Drive, plans call for Toller Road's intersection with Riverside Drive to be made right turn in, right turn out only. Those to be replaced by this roadway. This TIF would facilitate the full continuity of that roadway all the way to Village Center Drive. So that's a significant plus. We think what it's doing in terms of green space, park, advancing the greenway, also very much a plus, and we believe that the general approach to establishing the grid, providing the urban kinds of buildings that lie in that grid appropriately, again, subject to planning and design review going forward, it still has to happen. It's in full compliance with the vision and the goal for the Bridge Street District. And would recommend that you approve this at your second reading, which I think is scheduled for
January 5th.
First week of January. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions of council?
I have a question about John Shields Parkway. So it goes from Riverside Drive, it's a little hard to read this map here, but where, during this phase of it, does it actually end at Dublin Parkway, or does it go up to Sawmill Road?
It would end in Dublin Village Parkway, which has continuity then onto the road, but this doesn't do any of the internal Dublin Village Center developments.
Okay, that was my question. Thank you.
And in conjunction with the other piece of real estate being discussed that's being acquired from the Wendy's corporate facility, be before you next time, you would in effect have both east-west movements through their full continuity from Riverside Drive on with that right-of-way in place. So we're making great progress on key roads.
And I wanted to be, for the record, clear that even though we don't know what the mixed-use development will ultimately be, that it is not intended that this area would be built as strip retail or anything.
That's correct. that would not be compatible with the vision.
Any other questions? Tim?
Yeah. I saw Angel move away and try and hide from me. I thought she was moving to the podium, anticipating my question. On the bottom of page 3 of 4 of the memo, the minimum service payments, could you help me understand that, please?
Sure. When we are contemplating a development agreement with a developer, we look at the level of infrastructure that is necessary that the city would be putting in towards it. And what we do is then determine if the developer is going to be needing us to do certain roadway improvements, for example, in this, what do we want to ensure their development is worth? And so by placing a minimum service payment in there, it ensures that we are going to receive service payments of a specified dollar amount that will go to repay these public infrastructure improvements. Not in this case, but one of the things the city is always, or we are looking to do to protect the city, is to not allow a developer to come in and say, we're going to build $100 million worth of something, city finance X dollars of improvements, but then they only come in and build $50 million worth of something. That obviously impacts the revenue that we would receive to repay that level of public investment. So by placing a minimum service payment into an agreement, it ensures that they have to make service payments of a certain dollar amount, even if their property is not valued as expected.
Okay, and in this particular case, I was trying to understand the example that is given here. The first building permit is issued in 2015. The first minimum service payment would be computed based on the applicable real property taxes for tax year 2018. So that's to allow for some increased value, I'm assuming, correct?
It allows for, so that they are not, during their construction period, having to meet a certain dollar requirement. There is always, because taxes are a year in arrears, there's always some buildup. So it allows them a couple of years to get their project built before that gets invoked, yes.
But then it sets the value.
Correct.
Presumably higher for our benefit.
Right. We would expect that the value of this development will be higher than 20 million. But this minimum service payment sets the floor.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, we'll have the second reading on January 5th, 2015.
Thank you.
I'd move the next two ordinances, 11614 and 11814. And I'd move that we dispense with council rules of order in order to consider both these ordinances together. Is there a second?
Mr. Lechleiter?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mayor Keenan? I'm sorry, Ms. Chennesy Zerker?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gerber?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Okay, and if you just read the titles, please.
Declaring the improvement to certain parcels of real property in the city's Bridge Street district to be a public purpose and exempt from taxation, providing for the collection and deposit of service payments and specifying the purposes for which those service payments may be expended, specifying public infrastructure improvements directly benefiting the parcels, authorizing compensation payments to the Dublin City School District and the Tolles Career and Technical Center, and Ordinance 11814, declaring the improvement to certain parcels of real property in the city's Bridge Street district to be a public purpose, exempt from taxation, providing for the collection and deposit of service payments and specifying purposes for which those service payments may be expended, and authorizing compensation payments to the Dublin City School District and the Tolles Career and Technical Center.
Okay, very fine, thank you. Angel?
All right, Mr. Fogler provided a lot of information in his presentation that is relevant to this, but one of the things I want to highlight is we are requesting, in essence, the creation of two different TIFs. Under the TIF statute, there is a section that deals with using the service payments to fund public infrastructure improvements, which is how all of our TIFs have been created in the past. There's also another section called a .41 TIF that allows the service payments generated in a particular TIF area to be used for not only public infrastructure improvements, but also private improvements. One of the conditions of service payments being collected and used in that fashion, one of the requirements is that the city hold title to that particular parcel at some point in time prior to the legislation being passed. In this particular development, as you are aware, we are currently the owners of the buyer's property. So because of this, we wanted to allow the flexibility to use those service payments generated on that property once it develops in order to possibly fund some private improvements, such as parking structures that may be in the Bridge Street District TIF area. With any TIF legislation, we do outline the public infrastructure improvements as well as the defined area, but this would just allow us a little bit more flexibility as to how those dollars are used, again, just in this one particular area.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Angel. We'll have the second hearing on January 5th, 2015. Are there any comments or questions from council? Very well. And ordinance 119-14.
Establishing appropriations based on the 2015 operating budget of the City of Dublin, State of Ohio for the fiscal year ending December 31, 2015.
Introduction?
I'll introduce it.
Thank you.
This appropriates the funds in accordance with the operating budget that was approved earlier this evening in ordinance 109-14.
Okay, very well. Council, questions or comments? I'll move to dispense with the public hearing. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Janice Zerker?
Yes.
Mr. Lucklider?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? Yes. Vice Mayor Gerber?
Yes.
And Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Very fine. Ordinance,
No, we
Sorry,
need to
we
vote
need
on the
to-
ordinance.
oh, I'm
now.
sorry.
Yeah, and vote on the ordinance.
The ordinance, thank you.
Vice Mayor Gerber?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Lucklider?
Yes.
Ms. Janice Zerker?
Yes.
And Mr. Peterson?
Okay, now ordinance 120-14.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with the Ohio Department of Transportation to finance the I-270 US 33 improvement project through the State Infrastructure Bank Program and declaring an emergency.
Okay, introduction?
Introduce it.
Thank you.
We-
Angel?
The legislation before you this evening authorizes the city manager to execute an agreement with the State Infrastructure Bank. As you are aware, we have been working with ODOT and MORPC on funding for the interchange over the past few years, and the completion or the construction is slated to begin in the early part of 2015. So in the anticipation of that, we are shoring up the funding, of which $35 million will come from the State Infrastructure Bank program. $25 million will be paid by MORPC, and the remaining amount, $10 million, will be paid from the city. We do anticipate bringing forward additional legislation in January that will have the final documents provided by ODOT for the SIB program. And the city will be using service payments within our Russilli, Pizzuti, and Upper Metro TIFs to make these payments for the construction of the interchange.
Okay, thank you. Council, questions or comments? I have a motion to dispense with public hearing and treat as an emergency.
So moved.
And
Vice Mayor Gerber?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Saleh? Mr. Peterson? Mr. Lucklider?
Yes.
Ms. Janice Zerker?
on the ordinance?
Mr. Lucklider?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gerber?
Yes.
Ms. Saleh? Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Janice Zerker? And Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Okay, ordinance 121-14.
Authorizing the city manager to execute necessary conveyance documents to acquire a 0.011 acre or more or less permanent easement and a 0.006 acre more or less temporary easement from E. Elaine T. Har, trustee of the E. Elaine T. Har Revocable Trust, executed March 12, 2009, for the property located at 8668 Highland Croy Road for the construction of a shared use path connection and declaring an emergency.
Okay. Introduction?
I'll introduce it.
Thank you. Marcia?
I think the title pretty much says what it's for. It's for the completion of a bike path connection along Highland Quarry Road. This is one of, I believe, 6 property owners that we'll be dealing with, and we are asking for adoption as waiving the second reading and asking for adoption this evening.
Very fine. Any council questions or discussion?
Move to dispense with the public hearing, treat it as an emergency.
I'll second that. Ann?
Mr. Lucklider?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Saleh?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gerber?
Yes.
And Ms. Janice Zerker?
Yes.
On the ordinance, please?
Ms. Saleh?
Yes.
Ms. Janice Zerker?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gerber?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Lucklider?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Fine. Ordinance 122-14.
Amending the annual appropriations ordinance for the fiscal year ending December 31, 2014.
Okay. Introduction?
I'll introduce it.
Thank you.
This is our final amendment to the 2014 appropriations. We bring this forward each year, which basically cleans up all of our accounts, projects that were funded through various council action throughout the course of the year. Many of the amendments are TIF-related, so those payments would, or those expenditures would be repaid from service payments coming in. And then it is notable that there are 2 requests on this ordinance that are related to projects that were anticipated to be funded in 2015. One had to do with the salt purchase, and the other had to do with a sewer improvement project. So as a result of that, we will come forward in 2015 and unappropriate the funds so that we're not double appropriating.
Very fine. Council, questions or comments? I have a motion to dispense with the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Dan, on the motion?
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Lucklider?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Salee?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gerber?
Yes.
Ms. Janice Zerker?
Yes.
And Mayor Keenan?
On the ordinance?
Mayor Keenan? Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Lucklider?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? Ms. Salee?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gerber?
Yes.
Ms. Janice Zerker?
Yes.
Very fine. Okay, now we're into the other of our agenda. First item is ground of remembrance, maintenance improvements. Fred?
Good evening. In your packet is information regarding some specific recommendations regarding the improvements of the grounds of remembrance. As council is aware, there's been some issues with the continued keeping up with the loose aggregate path within this site, and the one recommendation really is to replace the loose limestone screening with an exposed aggregate concrete path, still using the limestone as it would have the appearance of the limestone screening, using the limestone as really the aggregate for this exposed aggregate concrete path. Second recommendation would be to use a charcoal gray color to highlight the inscriptions on the dedication pavers. Those probably have not been as readable as we thought they would become with age, and so I think by utilizing a charcoal gray appropriate epoxy paint, that it would give the right level of contrast on the lettering without kind of making it too garish, I guess. Third recommendation would be to use the same charcoal gray paint to highlight the letters of the Dublin Veterans Park sign that faces Dublin Road itself. And the fourth recommendation is, within the project, there is an interior handrail that was initially thought was needed for ADA requirements, but with the utilizing of the exposed concrete path being recommended, we would still be in all compliance with ADA by removing of this interior handrail up on the screen right now. That is staff's recommendation for these improvements, and our intentions would be based upon, if approved, we would immediately get into renovation documents and get this out for a bid as soon as possible.
Sure.
And I am here to answer questions.
Okay, thank you, Fred. Council discussion, comments?
Fred, I just want to thank you for your extra effort on this. We've had a lot of citizen inquiry into this right here at this podium, and what you've done here and the solutions, I think, are excellent. I presume they've been vetted with the artist as well?
Yes, they have. And again, one of the things, I think that again, using limestone screening, the limestone as the aggregate for the exposed concrete is a good way of still allowing some of the original design intentions to carry through with this renovation. So yes, the answer to your question is simply yes. We definitely have, vetted these issues with the original design.
Great job. I understand that with the old bricks, they're going to potentially be.
Yeah, it's actually more economical, really, to start over. What happens how they do these inscriptions is actually they essentially sandblast them, but that's a stencil that's required in order to do the sandblasting. They would just leave that stencil on, so sandblast, then immediately follow up with the paint, so they'd be utilizing the stencil as the guide for the paint. The difficulties involved in taking an artist brush and trying to paint each inscription would just become...
My point is the old stones that are there now, the pavers?
Yeah.
Those are going to be returned or potentially returned or potentially available?
Yeah, they could be one of our ideas, and they're probably going to just be absorb too much dirt over the years. It's just flipping them upside down and having the backside of these engraved, but in reality, it's just going to cause more problems. So yes, these could be given back to
Good job, thank you.
donors.
And Fred, when you said that the railing was going to be removed, I assume you also mean the pedestals sitting at?
Absolutely, yes, yeah. The center rail system in its entirety would be removed, yes.
And Fred, you mentioned painting, but it's really an epoxy.
It is an epoxy paint, and I actually have a sample here in the corner if anyone wants to look at what we're talking about, as far as the finished product would be.
It brings the sealant up to the level of the face of the brick, right? Is that right?
No, they're still inscribed. They're still, in fact, why don't I just grab the brick real quick and...
We're concerned about these things freezing and breaking off.
They just happen soon, and I think we would unprotected they happen.
Guys, can we get this on the record, please?
Okay.
Mr. Reiner was questioning whether or not that they're, through a freeze-fall cycle, will we start some of the more narrow edges of the inscriptions break off. And I said, we really haven't had much of that issue to begin with, but by having this epoxy paint kind of seal those where the water tends to lay inside the inscriptions, I believe we will not have that as an ongoing issue.
Okay, very fine. Okay.
Only God knows for sure on this one.
Fred, I appreciate all your hard work on this, and appreciate you also adding that the signage on Dublin Road. I think that's it's kind of hard to see, just like the bricks along the sidewalks there. Okay. Is there a motion? Well, I'll make a motion to approve the staff recommendations.
Second. Mayor Keenan. Ms. Janice Zerker.
Yes.
Mr. Reiner.
Yes.
Mr. Lechleiter.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gerber.
Yes.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Ms. Salee.
Yes.
Thank you.
Fred. Okay. Next, discussion regarding proposed Riverside Drive, future John Shields Parkway, pedestrian underpass. Staff presentation by Darren Meyer. Darren? I think we went through a lot of this just a couple weeks ago, so I think you had some updates for us.
Yes. When we, in November, when we looked at potential for an underpass crossing under Riverside Drive at John Shields Parkway, one of the questions that emerged from council was to better understand the context of Riverside Drive and where that crossing would take place, and also a very brief update on some of the components of Riverside Drive. So we're going to briefly look at three things: an overview and context of Riverside Drive design, some of the traffic calming elements that we're incorporating into that design, and then we'll revisit the three underpass options for your review again at the conclusion of that. This view shows a plan view of a portion of the Bridge Street District as it exists today. This is I-270 at the top of the view with Emerald Parkway. You can see the Scioto River running north-south here through the center of the view, Riverside Drive just along here. Toller Road, and then 161 down here. So we'll have a few views that use this orientation to give you an overview of how the streets are developing. The highlight in orange shows the proposed roundabout. Most of our presentation tonight is going to focus not on all the aspects of these roadway projects, but on some of the traffic calming aspects and how they relate to each other with respect to pedestrians and cyclists crossing these roads. One aspect that I wanted to mention about the roundabout is that as Dublin is very well familiar with these, they tend to be self-enforcing from a driver speed standpoint. There's fairly uniform speeds that most motorists use to these roundabouts that are roughly 20 miles an hour or under. So when you think of motorists that are entering this portion of Riverside Drive from 161 or from the south, the roundabout itself will have a great calming effect on traffic from a speed reduction standpoint. The orange highlight here shows the realigned Riverside Drive. It's been moved to the east to accommodate a park along the Riverside here. And then it ties back into the existing Riverside alignment just south of I-270. This view shows the street network at full build out in the district to give you some context for how this fits in. We have two highlights on here. This is a very small portion of John Shields Parkway, which is under construction, and the Dale Toller connector here, and Mandy's going to update you on the progress of both of those. So these are the pieces of that network that are currently under construction now. This shows the two future bridge crossings over the Scioto River, the pedestrian bridge to the south, and a future vehicular connection at John Shields Parkway. These are very important links, both of these, in terms of marrying the east side of the district to the west side. And they are part of this internal loop road system that we've referenced several times in previous discussions, which has great value to the district because it will touch virtually all of the developments and neighborhoods within the 2 square mile district and serve to connect those to the core amenities, bring them to the riverfront park, the river itself, historic Dublin. And because of that value, we've looked at these as being signature streets and creating a level of finish and a level of design on these that's really going to encourage the walkability and the movement throughout the district. Before I move ahead, we're going to look at some details of Riverside Drive. Are there any questions about the larger context of the district? I'm going to shift views on you. In order to get a more detailed look at Riverside Drive, we're going to flip the viewport on you here. So we have the Scioto River here to the top of the page. This is Riverside Drive just below it. Off to our right to the north, we have I-270 and Emerald Parkway, and at the opposite end of the page, this is State Route 161 and the roundabout. All the roads that you see here are showing the future build-out condition of the network to give you a sense of the context for these decisions. Again, I'm going to focus a little bit on the traffic calming aspects of Riverside Drive. When we talk about traffic calming, we're really trying to meet two objectives. We're looking to reduce speed and increase driver attentiveness. And we can really achieve both of those through one large overarching strategy, which is to provide cues in the streetscape that signal a change to the motorist that there's a change in the prevailing road condition. And that those cues are really setting up the expectation that they're going to see something other than cars. They're going to see pedestrians, they're going to see cyclists, and so we'll go through what some of those specific strategies are. One note that I will make when we talk about some of these strategies is you'll hear me mention the visual field of the driver and creating a sense of enclosure. That's more than just a sort of design and planning concept. That's from a traffic engineering standpoint, there's been a lot of study in terms of how the visual field impacts your speed and your behavior as a motorist, which certainly I can go into more detail if there are questions, but just for shorthand, you'll hear me mention a lot the sense of enclosure, and that implies some of the benefits that it has from affecting the behavior of motorists and reducing speed. The first and maybe the most important thing that that the Riverside Drive design incorporates is on-street parking. We have shown and currently designed 40 spaces on the west side, on the park side of Riverside Drive, and we have 59 shown on the east side in these 3 blocks. So just under 100 spaces total of on-street parking on Riverside Drive. And what this on-street parking does is it reduces the apparent width of the street, creates that enclosure that I spoke about. You have the articulation of the cars themselves, the entry and exit maneuvers from those cars. You have the passengers entering and exiting and creating the visual impact of pedestrians. And all of these, again, sort of cumulatively will result in drivers better maintaining speeds. And what's interesting is that when we look at bump outs, which are very difficult to see in this view, and I apologize, but we're basically extending the curb at the end of these parking lanes to protect the parking bays. Those have several important functions that we'll talk about. Excuse me. One of the things that it does is it improves lane discipline as you're moving through here. I used to live just south of downtown on Parsons Avenue, and it's notorious for the weave, where if there's no one parked in the on-street parking bay, the drivers will sort of use that to overtake the car in front of them. And so these bump outs are important in terms of discouraging some of those maneuvers throughout the district and helping to calm traffic. These are the two crossings that are being proposed, at-grade crossings for pedestrians across Riverside Drive to the park and to the west side of the district. We're doing several things with these crossings. Again, I mentioned the bump outs, which have a couple other important impacts. One, it reduces the distance that you have to cross the street. The second is that it makes the pedestrians more visible to the oncoming motorists. We're also looking at using specialty materials. It won't look exactly like this. This is North Bank Park at Spring and Long Street downtown at Neal Avenue. But you can see the idea of using some alternate materials. We're proposing brick in these intersections. And that provides some visual and experiential cues for the motorists that help them know that this is a pedestrian area and to take some caution there. And we're also looking at the traffic signals at each of these intersections and having a protected pedestrian-only phase so that there would be no vehicular movements during a phase of the signal so pedestrians could cross with more confidence. This is a very significant portion of how we're approaching the design of Riverside Drive, and that is all of the streetscape and median and parkscape in this, which has tremendous and significant aesthetic, recreational, and environmental value. From a traffic calming standpoint, it also does several good things. Again, it creates that sense of enclosure and intimacy, which helps control speed. Interestingly, the canopy and the leaves create a little bit of a pattern of light and shadow on the road, which creates the same sort of texture that you would read brick or another alternative pavement in the road and helps give that additional visual cue for motorists. And they're also, not so much from a traffic calming standpoint, but from a pedestrian standpoint on the sidewalk, creates that additional buffer between moving traffic and the sidewalk zone. And then the last piece is the placement of the buildings themselves. What you see here, these orange buildings are consistent with the early framework planning. They're consistent with the development proposals as they've been put forth to date. And what these buildings do when they front the road and have minimal setback, which they are proposed to do, again, they create that great sense of enclosure. Most importantly, they have some very urban characteristics, which again, create the expectation that pedestrians are going to be present. So when you have front doors, when you have awnings, when you have front entries, when you have those type of elements that are on the road itself, you get motorists that are going to respect that context and better observe appropriate driving speeds and behavior. So cumulatively, all of those elements that we discussed are some of the tools that we're using to work very hard to take what now is somewhat of a suburban arterial and convert it to more of a city street and make it walkable and create a condition under which people would be comfortable crossing it to get to the Riverside Park on the west side. So again, I'll pause here if there are any questions about Riverside Drive before we look again at the underpass.
I have just one, if I may. What will be the actual speed limit along this stretch of Riverside Drive?
Just yell it out.
As designed right now, it's 40 miles per hour. But as the area develops, the Ohio Revised Code actually allows for cities, municipalities to apply a lower speed limit per the prima facie speed of 35. So ultimately, I believe that would be the goal. But from day one, it'll be 40 miles an hour.
Right. And just to follow up on that, Mandy, correct me if I'm wrong, but the process that you go through to look at a speed limit reduction involves some measurement of speeds that are on the roadway, or no?
Not in this case. There's actually Ohio Revised Code that allows for developed areas and then the city council could actually just pass an ordinance, and then it could become 35 miles an hour, and it would not have to go through the speed limit study as it would currently in this setting.
Thank you.
I'm finished.
Could you go back to the picture that you had? Well, I sort of would like this one and then the picture you had of the parking on Riverside Drive, so that I'm trying to understand. Riverside Drive, where you show it now, has been now moved east, right?
Correct.
And the dark line, the gold line, where it actually states Riverside Drive, sort of, if you could, in today's, the way it looks today, could you sort of tell me where that is, that parking?
Relative to Digger and Finch,
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Digger and Finch really just sits inboard just west of the Riverside Drive alignment.
Okay, so
The
those,
building itself sits
all right,
here.
so that parking would be on that area. Okay, so the road is actually east of that.
Correct.
And then there's, then, okay. It's hard to envision this parking there, I know. Because it's going to be so different looking, I guess, that, you know, it's sort of is like on Front Street. Some of what you're showing is what they've done downtown on Front Street, except they don't allow parking on Front Street.
During
they
peak
do
times,
around the mile, I guess.
Yeah, they allow parking except during peak, you know,
Okay,
morning
so
and
maybe
evening rush
I'm
hour.
driving more
Yeah.
at the time, okay. So that's something about what it will look like, a little bit.
It is, and I think a better example that we may have mentioned last time is actually on the same route as Riverside Drive moves into downtown where North Bank Park is. They actually have the
Right.
bump outs that protect the
Right,
parking
yeah.
lane. It's the same state route, so you can get a sense of what that looks like with the parking.
And that's true, because, I mean, I do see people walking across the street there.
Mm-hmm.
And it has 6 lanes or something, so at least 5 lanes there. And of course, there's a light there. And here you're not talking about lights.
Yeah, actually, the benefit of what we're proposing here is that both John Shields Parkway and Bridge Park Avenue will have, doesn't look like that's shining, will have signals day one. At North Bank Park, they have not warranted, they have not activated that signal at Hanover. So as you come in, there's really only one signal at Neal that you stop. So we'll have, you know, a slight advantage over that condition here.
So there will be traffic lights there?
Correct.
They don't seem that far apart to have 2 traffic lights like that.
It's about 1,100 feet.
And they'll be always on to go red and green, or there will be, like we do in downtown historic Dublin, that they would be pushed when a pedestrian wants to use it?
There'll be buttons for the pedestrian to activate them.
So otherwise, it would always be green?
The default condition will be green on Riverside Drive, unless there's a pedestrian that activates it. And what that does is that, you know, that allows for, you know, traffic flow in conditions where there aren't pedestrians present, and when there are, they can cross.
We get that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So this is, excuse me, this is a summary slide that again shows Bridge Park Avenue and John Shields Parkway. You can see the green here as part of this loop system. This is the primary way that all residents, you know, employees, users of the east side of the Bridge Street District will cross and access the park and move over to the west side here. And one of the things that we looked at was the potential for, at a planning level, having an underpass under Riverside Drive, given that today it is a major arterial coming through here. There was some public concern expressed about having that option there. And as we looked at that early on, there are a couple things that drove the location of that potential underpass connection. One is the footprint of it. Because we have to go under the road, it requires some ramps or stairs in order to access it. And given the type of development that's proposed here with Crawford Hoying and Bridge Park Avenue, the level of retail and mixed use that's here, and the connection to the pedestrian bridge, the real estate here is incredibly valuable in terms of the vibrancy and the amount of space that we need to accommodate those sorts of uses. John Shields Parkway, which is a little less intensely developed in terms of how it's currently conceived with respect to retail and restaurants and those types of uses, along with the fact that we have a publicly owned green space here, which gives us some real estate in order to make that grade change under the road, led us to recommend, at least as we studied at the planning level, the location of the pedestrian underpass here. And as we discussed last week, this is, by the way, just for your reference, we're going to look again at those 3D views, not last week, in our last meeting. We'll look at the 3D views that we studied in our last meeting. Those are being shown as if we're sort of floating above the Sauter River, looking back to the east across the intersection of Riverside and John Shields Parkway. So you can see here, this is option A. This is what's currently designed in the Riverside Drive scope of work, where we have a ramp system, which is an accessible route. It's 5%, which takes you from the corner of John Shields Parkway. This is Riverside Drive. This is John Shields Parkway. This is some hypothetically average proposed building here. It doesn't represent a development proposal. Takes you from this corner on a ramp down and underneath the road, and you can see an outlet here into the park. Some of the pros and cons I'll just mention briefly as we go through these. Probably the biggest drawback to this is that it impacts significantly the greenway and the ability of this building to address the street in the corner. From a positive standpoint, it provides the most gradual and universally accessible route from street grade down under the street into the park. The second option was to maintain the tunnel under Riverside Drive again, be accessed only by a stair in this scenario. This is certainly an improvement over the footprint that space occupies here. You can see you've got much more of the green intact and the ability of the building to address the corner here. There are some interesting trade-offs with the stair. If you think about the potential users of the underpass, whether it would be families with young children, maybe the elderly, people that wouldn't be as comfortable potentially crossing the street, they would have to navigate 30 steps to get down 15 feet and go under the road and back. So it's, sort of speculation as to how much it would potentially be used since it's logically much more convenient to cross the street here. Just a reminder, as we talked about in our last meeting too, we do have an accessible route at street grade to get across the street and into the park. So if we do an accessible ramp down, it would be redundant with that. And the last option is no tunnel underneath the road. And I have a summary slide here. I can go backwards to show these in more detail that shows the costs that are associated with each of these solutions.
Okay, thank you. Council questions, comments?
Darren, how many stairs did you say in option B?
There's 30 steps to get down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So is it a natural grade change from the west to the east, or is there going to be some excavation on the west side, at the tunnel entrance there?
There will be some. You do take advantage of the natural fall to the river, so it's not as extensive as you normally would, but there will have to be some excavation here to make that work.
So people that want to cross that grade, coming from the west, from the riverside on the other side, are there steps to climb there? Or?
There will be both a ramp and stairs. So there will be an accessible route and stairs to get from the park up to the street and across.
And do you know how many stairs will be, or steps will be on the west side?
It'll be approximately the same amount.
Okay, so you're going to have to climb stairs, potentially either way. There's going to be a ramp.
That's right.
As well. Okay, thank you.
I just have one question. On the pedestrian bridge, we are having an underpass tunnel there. I just missed that sentence that you said.
We are not proposing that at the pedestrian bridge. This is the one location that it's being proposed right now.
I would think that would be really the most important location.
At the pedestrian bridge.
Yeah. I mean, I really would, because we're using it as a link to tie together two sides of the river. And, I mean, this is important too, don't get me wrong, because this is a high-use area. It's cutting all the way back to Sawmill Road, hopefully. But I would think that pedestrian bridge, if we had to buy one, we'd want to purchase it for for the pedestrian bridge area?
I think the couple things that gave us some pause as we looked at that option is when you would come out on the pedestrian bridge side, you would have to make the maneuver that Mr. Lecklider mentioned, where you would be down 15 or so feet, and then you would have to take a ramp back up or stairs back up to get to the pedestrian bridge and across. So it's not maybe as convenient a route to get to the pedestrian bridge itself. And the other is that depending on the solution here, those corners are incredibly valuable, you know, as we've discussed before in terms of Crawford Hoying and that signature intersection of Bridge Park Avenue, and how we incorporate, how we get vertical circulation, whether it's a head house like you might see with a parking structure that sort of comes up into a plaza would be one option. So there's ways to do it, there's ways to design it, but we had some reservations for those reasons about locating it at the pedestrian bridge.
So you're recommending B?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
You're recommending B, is that correct? B as in boy?
B seems to be the best balance of some of the trade-offs of the pros and cons in terms of a limited impact from a footprint standpoint, the cost, you know, which may or may not be a driving factor, but it's a contributing factor. But it provides that option if we think there's going to be the public demand for that underpass route.
What would be the width of this tunnel?
14 feet.
Do we have any existing tunnels that are roughly that width? Trying to imagine.
That's probably wider, Paul, than, yeah, that's wider than.
Wider than any
yeah.
existing tunnel we have? Okay, thank you.
I guess that, to kick off the discussion, I guess, I like B because I don't think, I'd be concerned about C. I think that people, not everybody would feel comfortable being on the main road like that. And so this gives an option for you, because you could do either on this one, correct?
Yes, that's
Yes.
correct.
So.
And one of the other items, I know today, we had a conversation, and the issue of the steps, there was some concern about people with strollers, whatever, and one of the things that we are also looking at and evaluating is it the possibility to have ramps instead of steps, which would make it easier for people on bikes and strollers and things like that.
I would agree with that. And the other thing, just maybe because of the time of year it is something that's going to have to be a priority for cleaning off all the time, making sure it's not snowy and icy, you know.
Other preferences?
Yeah, B is good.
Yeah, for the reasons I stated last time we discussed this, I favor B.
Somebody want to make a motion?
I recommend that we instruct the staff to move forward with the implementation of the option B.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? And
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Salee?
Yes.
Mr. Lecklider?
Yes.
Ms. Janice Zerker?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gerber?
Yes.
Mayor Keenan?
very fine.
Vice Mayor, we have one more slide, just a quick update on the lighting for Riverside Drive, if
Yeah.
I just have one more.
Right.
All right. Yeah, we're gonna.
I think there was a question previously about what lighting we were using on Riverside Drive. I just want to give a very quick update on that. This shows the two current streetlight standards that are used in the city. The smaller one is used in the historic district, and this is the streetlight standard that's used in the balance of the district. There were some concerns about whether this was architecturally appropriate for what we're looking at in the Bridge Street district. What we're proposing is two fixtures in the district. This is a smaller pedestrian scale fixture, which would be used on all of the two-lane roads, which is the vast majority of the roads in the network, with the exception of Riverside Drive, 161, some of the larger arterials. And we would look at this for the larger arterials. This gives you a slightly better view of that fixture. We would look at, it's basically the same lamp that we have here, so there'd be some relationship in terms of the family between the small and the larger fixture, but we'd have a mast arm on that and a more architecturally pleasing lamp here to go with that. So this would be the ensemble for the Bridge Street district. Again, we would keep the same historic district in that proposal.
Is that fine with everybody?
Yes.
I guess that's a yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
We need to change the,
Yeah.
interrupt
Okay,
for a
well,
minute.
let's take a few-minute break then.